In a discussion with someone, maybe your spouse, you were winning. Every rational mind in the universe knew you were winning. The Lord knew you were winning. And your spouse changed the subject. Can I see your hands? Oh, look at this. We have got it. Those of you in the viewing audience, you are free to engage in this survey as well. And we'd like to welcome our viewing audience that's joining us on the live stream. We're really glad you're here. We're going to talk in these sessions in front of us this afternoon about a topic where people love to change the subject. Instead of keeping the main thing, they change it to something else. And this is an epic problem for the pro-life cause. A number of years ago, actually several decades ago, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 suffered a catastrophic crash that killed everybody on board. And here's what happened. While they were on their approach to Miami, the flight crew noticed that there was a warning light on for the landing gear. And they became so obsessed with figuring out what was wrong with that indicator light, even though the nose gear had gone down and locked into place. We're talking a perfectly operational airplane. And the flight crew, all three in the flight deck, were so keyed in on that light, they forgot to fly the airplane. And they forgot, or didn't notice, I should say, that the autopilot had become disengaged, and they literally flew the plane into the ground trying to track down a root problem with an indicator light. We want you to leave this session today knowing how to keep the main thing the main thing. And let me tell you why that's important, men and women. You have joined us at a very unique time in our nation's history. Have you noticed that the abortion debate has heated up? Have you noticed that it almost seems like it's going viral, not just on social media and Twitter, where everything is viral, but where people are just even in regular conversations, it's almost like they don't know how to converse with one another anymore. It's heating up like crazy. Why is that? I'm going to tell you why. The abortion debate is not about a surgical procedure. It's not about choice. It's not about trusting people to make their own personal decisions. Rather, it's about a fundamental worldview question that is dividing this nation right down the middle. And here's what that question is. Who counts as one of us? This is why you see states like New York, Illinois, Vermont, Connecticut rushing to liberalize abortion to the furthest extremes, even refusing to protect children who survive abortion procedures. This is why you see other states going the other way. Georgia, Ohio, Missouri, Alabama, Louisiana, passing legislation to protect unborn humans. Why is this so contentious? Because for the first time, the federal courts are signaling that they are going to release the abortion issue at some level back to the states to decide for themselves. What happened in Roe versus Wade is one branch of the federal government, the federal courts, co-opted the abortion issue from the legislative and executive branches of government, leaving them almost no say in the issue. Now what we're seeing is a signaling from the courts that though they may not reverse Roe, though they may not gut it entirely, they do indicate that they're going to return some of the power back to the states. When that happens, men and women, you and I in our individual states are going to have to step up and become pro-life apologists. It is going to be on us to make that case for life. And here's what's going to happen today. In just a few minutes, Megan Ullman is going to come up, and she's going to teach you how to make a case for life on hostile turf. I will then come back after our break and talk about how we answer the 6 common objections that people give to the pro-life view. How do we answer these objections, and how do we do it in a way that will help you keep your thinking clear when people are throwing everything at you, including the kitchen sink? And then in the third session, we're going to do something a little unique. We're going to talk about the underlying worldviews that are in play right now on the abortion issue. Because one of the things we do is fail to engage the worldviews that drive people to abortion in the first place. There's a tendency in our culture now, even among pro-lifers, to chase down root causes of abortion. And by that, what people mean is, well, we've got to solve all the problems culturally that make women want to have abortions. We're actually going to present a different thesis. Our big problem isn't root problems. Our big problem is worldviews that drive people to consider abortion. And we'll talk about 3 of those in particular that are having a profound impact on the abortion debate right now. But before we do that, I want you to look at a short video clip that is going to bring home to all of us and remind us. Some of you have seen this clip, but it's going to bring home very clearly the gravity of the situation in front of us and why it's so important for Christians to engage this issue and be prepared to make a defense for what they believe. This short video, some of you have seen by Peter Heck, that talks about just the numerical disaster that abortion has been compared to other loss of life issues. We'll look at that, and those of you on the live stream, when that video ends, Megan will be here to make her case. But let's take a moment right now to just view this short video clip to bring into focus why we need to engage on this issue.
Right where you are, I just want you to, right there in your seats, just shut your eyes. What you're about to hear are the sounds of metal BBs striking the side of a tin can. For every BB that strikes, it represents 10,000 lives lost in the wars of America's past. 10,000 lives for every BB. This is the reality of what is occurring in your country. The American Revolution, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Korean conflict, the conflict in Vietnam, September 11th and the War on Terror. Since 1973, the War on the Unborn Child. God help us.
Indeed. I was at a very large Catholic school in Texas yesterday and played that clip for them and sat and watched 900 high schoolers with their eyes closed listening to the video clip with their brows furrowed and the expression of pain on their faces. I saw a girl in the higher bleachers in the back even cover her ears as if she couldn't take any more of that sound. We have to get this right, you guys. There's too much at stake not to. And so to dive into how to make a case for life in a culture like ours, I'm going to start with a story, and I'm going to ask you first, who is familiar with the book You Are Special by Max Lucado? Show of hands. Several of you. Okay, for those who aren't, I'll set it up for you. This book is about a people group called the Wemmicks. Now, they're a very interesting little puppet people. They're little wooden puppet people, and they live in a village, and they have an odd way of life. They spend all day, every day, watching one another. And several of the Wemmicks, as you could imagine, have all the skill sets you would want in a talented individual. They are star athletes, so they can run fast and jump high. They can do all of the acrobatic tricks. They have some who can sing well or speak well. They have some whose paint is shiny and new and beautiful to look at. And so the other Wemmicks watch those Wemmicks do their great things, and they take stickers out of a box on their belt and award those Wemmicks with gold star stickers. And so some of the Wemmicks are covered in gold stars. But some of the other Wemmicks are not as talented. In fact, our main character is one of those. His name is Punchinello. It's a strange name. I didn't come up with it, but Punchinello is his name. And Punchinello tries to do these things. He tries to run fast. He tries to jump high, but he's pretty clumsy. Of the story, he doesn't want to go outside and be around the other Wemmicks. He wants to stay in his home because he's begun to believe what they have deemed him unworthy. He believes that he is unworthy. We're going to leave him there for just a little while. There's more to that story. But I want you to notice that there is a great big idea in this little bitty children's book that we need to understand. Punchinello lives in a society where some of his kind don't matter as much as others. Men and women, we live in a society where some human beings don't matter as much as others. Some human beings don't matter as much as others. This is an idea. But I've learned a thing or two about ideas, as the great Leonardo DiCaprio once said. In the film Inception, if you've seen it, I don't entirely understand that movie, nor can I really recommend it. But there is one line in that movie that he got exactly right. His character said, an idea can be the most, who works with the Colson Center, but is also a fellow faculty member here at Summit, says, ideas have consequences. Dangerous ideas have victims. That's exactly right. And this idea that some human beings don't matter as much as others is not a new idea. It's been around for quite a while. You can do a brief glance at history and see other ways in which this idea has manifested, other societies that have asked the same question, who counts among us? We can go as far back as Israel under Pharaoh, that was slavery. You can fast forward to ancient Rome and see this idea manifested in any number of wicked ways. Abortion was practiced in ancient Rome, as was infanticide. Infants that were unwanted were left exposed to the elements. Fathers were allowed under Roman law to kill their adult children. And let's not even begin to discuss the travesties that took place in the arena with gladiator battles and the slaughtering of innocents for the purposes of entertainment. We can look at our nation's history, slavery once again. Also ongoing in the form of sex trafficking, another way of saying human beings are a commodity that can be used for something. And if I've got this right on the issue of abortion, as we have just heard in that video, the death toll is staggering because of a dangerous idea. This battle of ideas that we are in should be no surprise to us. Paul told us that this is the type of battle that we're in when he was defending his own ministry in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 through 5, when he said that our weapons are not weapons of the flesh. We don't carry gladiator swords, but we do have something that is divinely powerful for the tearing down of strongholds. And I think what Paul is talking about there are these sets of ideas and beliefs that people have about the world. Because he goes on to talk about these very things. He says we are to tear down arguments, lofty opinions that are raised up against the knowledge of God. And we are to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. 1 Peter 3:15 and 16 tells us we are to do that with gentleness and respect. But this is a battle over ideas. And our culture right now is struggling to answer these foundational worldview questions, many of which we will talk about today. One of those questions deals with the nature of truth itself. You'll hear more about that as we go throughout our time together. Is truth really true? Can we know it? Is moral truth something real, or do we just create that for ourselves? Men and women, people are answering that question. And the ideas that come as the results of those answers are playing themselves out in front of us with real-world consequences. The other question up for grabs is, what does it mean to be human? Christians, how in the world are we going to share a gospel message with a world that has forgotten who they are and what they are? What is it that makes us valuable as human beings? What is it that gives you value or rights that other people are obligated to respect? What is that thing? See, people are answering these questions too, and the ways they're answering the question results in ideas that are playing themselves out in front of us in devastating ways. So, but to talk about the issue of abortion, we have to understand that that truth question is a huge hurdle. And I just want to touch on that for a minute, because with this issue in particular, unlike other moral issues that we face, moral relativism is standing in the way of people really grasping clarity on the issue. Abortion, our nation is dying to frame as a preference kind of issue, as one that deals with what you come up with on your own. It's up to you to decide. And I will tell you this, as long as it's up to individuals to decide those things, what it is that's inside of them and whether or not it has value, then babies will continue to die, and that death rate will continue to rise. So how do we achieve clarity in a nation that has it that confused? 3 things in the time I have with you. Number 1, we're going to learn how to simplify this issue when we are talking about it. Now, don't hear me flippantly saying, oh, this is a simple issue. As someone who works in this field, I understand this is not simple in many ways. It is emotionally complex. It is psychologically complex. It can be economically and politically complex, but morally speaking, it is very, very simple. Because the entire debate over abortion hinges on a single question. We're going to learn what that question is and how to bring the conversation back there. Then we're going to answer that question in a way that may surprise some people. And finally, we're going to talk about why you matter. So my hope is that this entire presentation on how to defend the pro-life view would be one that ends up being encouraging to us all, because there is a great message underlying all of this. So to clarify and to simplify that issue, I need to tell you a story about my daughter. Her name is Neely. Now, Neely is 13 years old, but a few years ago, we were living in a log cabin in Noonan, Georgia, before we moved out here to beautiful Colorado, where my husband began working here at Summit Ministries. And my best friend, Courtney, came over to my house one day and brought her 3 little boys to play with my kids. Now, her oldest son, Micah, is one of Neely's best friends. And I also have a little boy in addition to Neely. So because it was a beautiful day and because we were eager to just sit down and catch up and have mom time, I sent all the kids into the backyard and left the door open. Now, I could hear everything that was going on, which is a necessity when you send 5 adventurous kids into the woods. But I could also not see what was going on because they were out there. So Courtney and I sat down to have coffee, which is, of course, the elixir of life if you're a mom. You know this about it. And I began to sip the coffee, and I heard the sound that every parent dreads, blood-curdling screaming coming from the backyard. Now remember, I have the only girl, and that scream was distinctly female. So I did what any good parent would do. I dropped the coffee, and just spoiler alert, that is the most tragic part of the story. And I began lunging for the back door. So I'm up and running, and as I get up from the chair and the coffee's falling, I hear my daughter continuing to scream, and then she says, "Get it off me! Get it off! Just kill it!" So I'm in mid-lunge, and those 3 seconds from my chair to the back door, as every parent also knows, seem like some kind of strange time warp into a little eternal moment where I'm thinking to myself, kill what? What's on my kid? Let me just tell you, if there was going to be a bug with a stinger on her, I was going to help her kill it. I don't do bugs with stingers, and some of you are with me on that. Fight or flight, I'm going to fight every time. It might have been the next door neighbor's dog. Now, my next door neighbor had a Jack Russell Terrier. He was so cute, and that's all. He was vicious. He would bite, the whole ordeal. So we're going to put Ace back into his fence. We're not going to kill the dog. Could it be her brother? Now, you laugh, but my 7-year-old does not really know from one day to the next whether he actually is Wolverine or just like a normal ninja. So I've got to know because I do the laundry in the house. So the point of the whole illustration is the answer to what is it matters. It matters. It was a green lizard for all you type A's out there in our viewing audience. I understand. The lizard got out of Micah's grasp into Neely's hand, slithered out of her hand, and went up her shirt sleeve. So she wiggled around until it flew across the backyard, and no animals were harmed in the making of that example. But the answer to what is it matters. Can we kill the unborn? That's the question we're grappling with when it comes to abortion. Can we kill the unborn? I'm going to go out on a limb and say, sure, if the unborn are not human beings. If it is true, as many would claim, that having an abortion is no different than clipping my fingernail or pulling a tooth, just a simple medical procedure, then I shouldn't have a problem with it. But if the unborn are human, that's different. See, we have to answer that question, what is the unborn, before we can even talk about whether or not we can kill the unborn. And the problem is that most people skip that question. And they'll go on and give you reasons as to why abortion should be legal or abortion should be allowed. And I just want to point out to you from the outset that the reasons that they give don't deal with unimportant matters. Every single one of the things I'm going to name in just a moment is important. I will often hear abortion is an issue of privacy. It's a private matter between a woman and her God or between a woman and her doctor. You have no say as to what goes on in the privacy of someone else's bedroom. That is the legal justification under the federal law. Some will say abortion is an issue of poverty. This woman can't afford to feed another child, so who are you to say that she should go through with yet another pregnancy? Some will say abortion allows women to pursue their educational goals, their careers, their dreams, without an unplanned pregnancy standing in the way of that. Abortion prevents unwanted children from being born. Why would you want someone to have a baby that nobody wants? Abortion prevents disabled children from being born who may suffer and have a poor quality of life. If we were to outlaw abortion, wouldn't women be harmed attempting to seek illegal abortions, back alley abortions? If we were to outlaw abortion, wouldn't we be imposing religion on other people? We can't do that, can we? All of these deal with important things. And the list goes on and on and on. But every single one of the justifications that I just named made the same mistake. They assumed something about the unborn, namely that the unborn are not human beings. That they're not human like you and like me. I want you to imagine for just a moment that my nephew AJ was up on stage with me. I wish he was, because he's super cute. In fact, that's the first thing that you would all agree on. He's 2 years old. He's about this tall. And that's the first thing you would notice. That's probably the cutest baby you've ever seen. See, my blue-eyed, blonde-haired brother married a beautiful woman who looks like a Mayan princess, and they made a beautiful baby. So AJ would be here, but he's undoubtedly human. You would all agree on that point. We have a 2-year-old boy standing here. Imagine that I read that same list of justifications back to you and told you that these are reasons why I ought to be allowed to kill AJ. None of you would go for that. You'd think I'd lost my mind. You'd say, no, we don't kill 2-year-olds in the name of privacy. We don't kill 2-year-olds because they're expensive. The students I speak to here at Summit are often shocked to know that we don't kill teenagers because they're expensive either. They're so relieved. Guys, we don't kill 2-year-olds when they stand in the way of something that we want. We don't kill 2-year-olds just because it seems like they're unwanted. There are orphanages around the world full of seemingly unwanted children. I think that's arguable. We don't kill 2-year-olds who are disabled. We have no problem with laws that make it harder to kill 2-year-olds in case someone might be harmed in attempting to do so. And it is no more religious to say that AJ has value and cannot be killed than to say that he doesn't. Everyone does those metaphysics, everyone. So important as they are, at the end of the day, when it comes to the abortion issue, it's not really about those things. It's about that question, what is the unborn? Is the unborn human, like AJ is human? When you're in conversation with someone, you can use a technique at LTI, at Life Training Institute, that we call trot out the toddler to demonstrate that point. You can do it as I just did it if you have a toddler in your family, or you could just simply say, if someone uses a justification such as, this woman can't afford to feed another child. You could say, hold on, just for the sake of conversation, let's say that I have a 2-year-old standing next to me. Hold out your hand about this high because it gives them something concrete to look at. And then go on and say, her family's really struggling and they can't make ends meet. In fact, her dad just lost his job a couple weeks ago. And so the family's having a hard time affording food at all. They've reached a consensus, though. They want to kill their toddler to lessen that financial burden. Do you think they should have that right? No, I'll be real with you. That person's going to look at you like you're insane. They're going to say, no, of course not. Ask them, why not? They'll say, because the 2-year-old is human. They may say, because the 2-year-old's already a person. They may even say, that's completely different. No matter what they say, you're back to your question in the conversation. Because you can pick up on, say, oh, is it different? See, I want to know, is that 2-year-old human? Is the unborn human like that 2-year-old is human? Let's talk about that. Then we can talk about poverty, or perhaps how to help the individual that you might be referring to. Careful thinkers have to make distinctions where they need to be made. So we've got to get it back to that question, what is the unborn? Now there's good news about that question because we do have an answer to that question. And when you pose it, it's only fair for you to have an answer to give to someone. But note that this is not a religious question. I don't go to my Bible to find the answer to the question, what is the unborn? It is, however, a scientific question. So I do go to science. And there is an entire field of science dedicated to the study of embryos. The fancy word for it is embryology. The science of embryology tells us very clearly what the unborn is. I'm going to read a quote to you from an embryological textbook, The Developing Human by Keith Moore and T.V.N. Persaud, who, if you go to medical school, you guys will read that, those of you who are students. Those of you who would like to go and read that, I wish you luck. You'll come out of that going, I'm not sure I pronounced every one of those words correctly, but it is a worthwhile endeavor. And it says, a zygote, which is a single-celled embryo, is the beginning of a new human being. Human development begins at fertilization, the process during which the male gamete unites with the female gamete to form a single cell called a zygote. This highly specialized cell marks the beginning of each of us as a unique individual. The science is very clear, and pro-lifers are not the only ones who would agree on that science that's been established. Dr. Warren Hearn, who is an abortionist himself, performs abortions, said this to a Planned Parenthood conference a few years ago in describing to other abortion doctors how to perform a particular procedure. He says, we have reached a point in this particular technology where there is no possibility of denying an act of destruction. It is before one's eyes. The sensations of dismemberment flow through the forceps like an electric current. Camille Paglia, a well-known feminist author, wrote this in Salon magazine back in 2008. Hence, I have always frankly admitted that abortion is murder. That is the word she chose, not the word I would always use. The extermination of the powerless by the powerful. She said abortion results in the annihilation of concrete individuals, not just clumps of insensate tissue. I mean, likewise, Naomi Wolf said the death of a fetus is a real death. To break down what that embryology said and take just a minute to unpack it, because that's important that we do that so that we understand it. What it's saying is that from the moment that fertilization happens, what we have is a living, distinct, whole human being. We know that it's alive because it fits the definition of an organism, that thing that we all learned right around middle school life science. It undergoes cellular reproduction, which is a fancy way to say that it grows. It metabolizes by turning food into energy. It responds to stimuli. Embryos have even been shown to be really, really good at wound repair, which is remarkable. It's alive. It is distinct in that it is a separate entity from its mother. It is not part of the woman's body, not like my arm is a part of my body. I mean, it is attached to her, yes, but it is not part of her. The embryo at that single-celled stage has its own unique genetic code that differs from its mother's and from its father's. In fact, something remarkable happens in that moment of fertilization. Dr. Maureen Kondik is a neurobiologist, brilliant scientist at the University of Utah. And she's often asked as a scientist, how do you know when one type of cell, in this case an egg cell, becomes a new type of cell? How do you know when that happens? She said the answer is very simple. Across the field in biology, we have one of two indicators that tell us when one kind of cell becomes another one. One of those is that it changes in the stuff that it's made up of. The fancy way of saying that would be its material composition. If it changes in its material composition, then we know we have a new cell. Another indicator is if it changes behavior, then we have a new cell. But only one of those things has to happen. And Dr. Kondik goes on to explain that we can, in fact, know when human life begins. She said it is observable at the moment of fertilization when sperm and egg meet within 250 milliseconds. The plasma membranes of those two cells begin to merge to form a hybrid cell surface, which means that that egg cell changes in its material composition within the blink of an eye. And what we have is a brand new cell. It goes from being an egg cell that could have existed where it was for about 24 hours to being a new kind of cell that can now live upwards of, 100 years, given medical technology, because it is a human being. That's remarkable. Within 3 minutes, it meets the second indicator because it changes behavior. When the zona pellucida forms, it goes from being an egg cell that's sole job was to attract sperm to being something like the Death Star that repels them. Thank you for getting my Star Wars reference. My husband would be so proud. Distinct, living, and whole. It's a whole human being. In other words, it's not part of another human being. Just as if I could scratch my hands, several of my skin cells have just tumbled to their imminent deaths on the floor in front of me. That's a little bit gross. Many of them were already dead, but some are still alive and will die in just a minute. Now, every single one of those skin cells contains my DNA encoding, but I am not guilty of mass murder. Those cells are part of me, and their job is to contribute to the overall function of the organism that is Megan. An embryo is different in kind from any other cell, even a sperm and an egg cell, both of which are alive, but are part of another organism and contribute to that organism's overall function. The embryo, even at that single-celled stage, its parts work together towards its function. It's a whole entity in and of itself. If you'll allow me to make a distinction between a couple of things so we can understand this a little better, the embryo is not a properties kind of thing. And what I mean by that, a properties kind of thing, is something that is nothing more than a sum of it. The embryo is a substance kind of thing. It came into being all at once. It doesn't become more of its kind as time passes. Substance kinds of things mature according to their kind as time passes. Each of you is a substance kind of thing. You didn't come from an embryo. You once were an embryo. And you matured according to your time or kind as time passes, because humanity does not come in degrees. One more distinction before we move on. The embryo is not a constructed thing by piece. And in an industrial society, we're often tempted to think of the embryo that way. That's why we hear language like, it's just a clump of cells. It's just a mass of tissue, as if you could add more pieces and the end product would be a baby. Think of how we've gone from terms like procreation, which is what my grandmother would have said, to what my generation exclusively calls it, reproduction. Dangerous ideas have victims. But the embryo does something that no constructed thing could ever do. See, from the time that you were an embryo, you drove your own development from within. Many of us are still developing. That's remarkable. Richard Stith is a philosopher who gives us a wonderful word picture to help us understand and realize this difference. He said, imagine that you have what is an artifact to many students, a Polaroid camera. We all know what that is, yes? Are we good? Okay, yeah. A Polaroid camera, the kind where the tab comes out, and you're in the Amazon jungle taking pictures of the scenery around you, and you go to snap a photo of what's in front of you, and as you hit that button, a black jaguar leaps out across the path, and you've captured it in your photo. Now, I am an expert on black jaguars because I watch Wildcrats with my children. I can tell you that they are very rare, certainly beautiful, but because they're rare, there's not many photos of them in the wild. So what you have is something of value. And I want you to imagine that someone comes and looks over your shoulder, and they see what you're holding, and they kind of shrug it off, and they take it from your hands, and they rip it in two and toss it down. Now, you would be furious with them. You'd say, what are you doing? I'd say, what's the big deal? It was just a brown smudge. You'd say, no, it wasn't. I was holding a photograph of a jaguar. It was rare and beautiful and valuable. It was already there. You just couldn't see it yet because it was doing what? Developing, just like the embryo. Science has an awful lot to say about that question, what is the unborn? We have an answer to that question. But men and women, you will get to the point where you start to talk about the science and you're trying to share it, and it doesn't seem to be having any impact. Your words are not penetrating to the heart of the person that you're speaking to or to the mind. In those moments, what do? I think sometimes the only way to reach people's moral intuition is to show them what abortion looks like. In just a moment, I'm going to play a 1-minute video clip. Let me tell you exactly how this is going to go. This video clip is hard to look at. In fact, those of you who are viewing at home, if you have young people in the room with you, you may take this time to make adjustments as needed for what's coming. It does not show an abortion procedure being performed, but it does show you the aftermath. It shows aborted fetuses or abortion victims from early in the pregnancy through late in the pregnancy. The reason for that is that because of the way the law stands right now, abortion is legal through all 9 months of pregnancy. Now, there is no narration on this clip, but there is music that plays over it. And the reason for that is if you know within your very core that this is something you do not want to see today, I respect that. And I invite you for that 1 minute to simply avert your gaze, look down, and you will not see anything you don't want to see. The music ending will let you know that the clip is done. And before we air that clip, please understand that the thing that keeps Scott and myself and our entire team talking, the thing that should keep you talking about this issue, is the realization that the gospel of Christ is objectively true. That means true in the way that matters, true in the realest sense of true. It's real. And that means that there is real hope and real healing available when it comes to an issue like abortion. And I never walk into a room without knowing that I'm going to be speaking to someone who's been impacted by this issue, whether it's directly or indirectly. So for any who choose to watch, please understand that apart from Christ, we all stand on a level playing field. But because of Christ, we have great hope that is freely offered to each of us if we will just receive it and walk in it. So if you choose to watch, please watch through the lens of that gospel. Let's show the video and then we'll pick up and close the session. It doesn't get easier to watch. Scott might not know this, but the first time I saw that film, he was the speaker that night and I was in the room. And I already agreed with him. I was already pro-life. So in my mind, I wondered, why was that necessary? Why would you show me that? I already agree with you. I don't want to see that. And he told a story that night that changed my mind on that issue altogether. And I'll share the same story with you. It's a true story. It took place in 1955, and it's about a young man by the name of Emmett Till, who was 14 years old that year. He lived in Chicago, Illinois with his mother, Mamie, and one summer she sent him to Money, Mississippi by train to visit his cousins for the summer. And before he got on that train, she gave him a gift, a ring that had belonged to his father, and it has his dad's initials inscribed in it. So Emmett put that ring on, and he got on the train with bright hope for a great summer with his cousins. And when that train arrived in Money, Mississippi, Emmett got off, and he found his cousins and began catching up and talking about life and how things had been, because they hadn't seen each other in a little while. And Emmett was bragging about life back in Chicago. In fact, he began talking about the girls, plural, that he'd been dating. He had pictures in his wallet of 2 young women, and both of them were white. And his cousins did not believe him. So on a dare, Emmett walked into Bryant Grocery Store in Money, Mississippi, where he bought a piece of bubble gum. And the record's not exactly clear as to what happened next. It may be that Emmett whistled at the clerk. It may be that he said something mildly flirtatious to her, or she may have made up the entire account. But whatever happened next, Emmett went home with his cousins, and 2 nights later, that woman's husband and another man came to Emmett's uncle's house. They broke in, they pulled Emmett from his bed, they put him in the back of their car, they took him to the outskirts of town, and they proceeded to beat him, torture him, completely undermine his dignity. And then they murdered him. Emmett was shot in the head. His body was tied to a cotton gin fan, which is a large piece of metal equipment, and they used barbed wire to do it, and then they threw that into the river. Now, after some heavy rains a couple of days later, some boys were fishing downstream, and they looked out in the water. They saw something. They weren't sure what it was, so they went to investigate, and they found Emmett. He was unrecognizable at that point, but he still wore that ring. And so once he'd been identified, law enforcement officials put his body in a wooden box, nailed the lid shut, and sent him home to his mother by train. And when Mamie Till got that makeshift coffin, she demanded that they hold an open casket funeral for her son. Now, people thought she'd lost her mind. They thought she'd gone crazy in her grief. And they said, Mamie, you can't do that. Don't you know what the climate is out there? Don't you know what people are saying about this? Don't you know what people would say about you? You can't do this. But she stood her ground and she said, I want the whole world to know what they did to my boy. Emmett Till did have an open casket funeral, and thousands walked in front of him, and pictures were taken of his body, photos that you can still find online. They are gruesome. But those photos were published in many publications, including Jet magazine. And not too very long after that, when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus, someone asked her, what gave you the courage to go through with something like that? You know what she said? I couldn't get that boy's image out of my mind. She was talking about Emmett Till. Rosa Parks already agreed that this was a heinous injustice that was taking place. She was already on the side of ending it. But that day, on that bus, she sat down and that image flashed in her mind and she said, enough. No more. Men and women, I am asking you to help me, to help Scott, to help Life Training Institute, to help Summit Ministries lovingly and graciously open the casket on this human rights issue. Because I guarantee you guys, if we don't, America will continue to tolerate what is a Holocaust, and it will never have to look at it. Because like so many other things, abortion is hidden away. In this case, it's hidden behind sterile white sheets and a lot of fancy rhetoric. Now, there are some who will concede your science. Just as I pointed out, there are pro-choicers who agree with the science and what it says. But they'll stop you and say, we know that it's human. We know what the science said. We've known it all along, but it is not a person yet. That's beginning to sound a little bit familiar to me. Because what they're really saying is that there are some human beings who are merely human, while there are other human beings who have achieved some status of import, who are valuable enough to be considered persons or rights-bearing persons. In other words, some human beings matter more than others. We're back to square one. This is no longer a scientific argument, but it is a philosophical one. And it deals with the question, what is it that makes human beings valuable? In fact, if anyone asks you or tells you, it might be human, but it's not a person, your first question should be, please tell me, what is the difference? What is it that makes a mere human being a valuable person? Philosophy gives us 2 categories with which we can answer this question. One of those categories is that you might be valuable like an instrument. For those of you who are musical, you know well that an instrument performs for a purpose. It has a particular function that it does. So instrumental answers are going to be like that. They're going to deal with traits and attributes and abilities, functions that you have. There are many of these types of answers. The other type of answer that philosophy allows us is that you might be intrinsically valuable Two I words, instrumental and intrinsic. Now, this one is so simple, most people just reject it or they overlook it. It's so simple that what it says is that you are valuable in light of the very thing you are. In other words, you matter just because you are human. That's all. Let's look at a real-world instrumental answer. Dr. Peter Singer is a bioethicist at Princeton University, also over in Australia. But he has written a book called Practical Ethics that is used in medical ethics classrooms all around the world. And Dr. Singer would say that you don't become a valuable person until you are sentient. And what he means by that, roughly, is that you are aware of yourself and your surroundings, that you have some ability to desire or plan for the future. He's particularly interested in your ability to gain pleasure or avoid pain. So sentient in that way. Now, Dr. Singer knows full well that the unborn are not sentient in that way. He is an advocate of abortion. He is also very consistent in his view because he also knows that newborns are not sentient in the way that he defines. So in that textbook, Practical Ethics, Dr. Singer does write that newborns who have a particular kind of defect or something like that, if their parents aren't satisfied with them, they ought to have the moral right to talk with their doctor and kill their newborn. After all, it would mean more happiness for people involved. They don't become sentient until around 28 days, give or take, after birth. Now, when drawing the line at sentience, that is the trait that he says answers the question, what is it that makes human beings valuable? He disqualifies whole other classes of humans as well as the unborn and newborns. He disqualifies anyone in the late stages of Alzheimer's disease who are not sentient, anyone in a coma, himself when he's asleep, me before I've had coffee, and that's not entirely a joke. See, that's the thing about sentience. It comes in degrees. It's one of the problems with it. So our question for someone like Dr. Singer might be, why is it sentience and not some other trait that gives us value? That's the grounding question. And then our other question is, to what degree do we need to possess that trait before we have value? Because it comes in degrees. That's why Stephen Schwartz disagrees. He says, no, intrinsic value is the only answer that makes sense. In fact, he says there's no relevant difference between the embryo that you once were and the adult that you are today that would make it okay to have killed you back then, but not now. In fact, Schwartz says there are only 4 areas of difference you can point out between embryos and us. I'm going to walk over here to talk about them because those areas are instrumental. Size, level of development, environment, that deals with where you're located, and degree of dependency. I'll walk through them again. But these are the differences that Schwartz says we can point out. None of them work, he says, to say you could have been killed as an embryo, but not as an adult. They don't matter that much. Differences in size. Some would say that the embryo is tiny, therefore it's insignificant. But since when does our size determine our value? Guys, we could play a game in this room called Let's All Stand Up. You guys can try it at home too. We'll start pulling out the measuring sticks and see who is the tallest among us. As a former gymnast, I can tell you I am going to lose that battle. But if size is the thing that determines our value, we've created a spectrum, and that spectrum creates problems because what it says is that smaller human beings matter less than larger ones. My nephew AJ, once again, wouldn't stand a chance in a world like that. Level of development, the unborn are less developed than we are. That's true. But my son, Rogan, is 7 years old. He is less developed than every man in this room. I can't kill Rogan for that reason. But if you're going to grant it for unborn human beings, logic demands consistency. And it says you've got to be consistent across the human spectrum. Dr. Singer's argument, by the way, is a type of level of development argument. And some of those level of development arguments begin to sound very sophisticated on university campuses, things like consciousness, sentience, organized cortical brain activity. But again, our question is, why is it that trait and not another, the grounding question? And to what degree must that trait be present before we have a valuable person? And who gets to decide that? Environment, where you're located, the unborn are inside, we are outside. That is a difference, a geographical difference of less than 10 inches. Logic, being the tricky, consistent thing that it is, says that if 10 inches in a change in location can bring you into valuable humanity, then by the same reasoning, that distance can take you out For those of you in the room here, be careful if you move to the next chair. But we just learned that we are the types of beings, substance types of things, that come into being all at once and have something that grounds our identity through time and through change. You guys could fly to the moon, and you would still be you. So environment doesn't do it. And degree of dependency, the unborn are dependent on their mothers for survival. That's true too. My mother is diabetic. She is dependent on medicine to help her body process sugar in a way that it can't. I cannot kill Debbie Talbert because she has dependency on something. But if you're going to grant it for the unborn, logic demands consistency, and you've got to be consistent. And what we find is that any time we give an instrumental answer, we create an unjust society in which some human beings matter more than others. The only answer that makes sense philosophically, the only place that there's any grounding, true grounding for human equality, is that we are intrinsically valuable. You count because you are human, and you share a common human nature with every other human being from the time they come into existence as an embryo to the time they die. And if Christianity is true, and I think that it is, long after that. That's really good news for every single one of us, every single person in the room, and every single person watching from home, in a world that demands that you think of yourself as functionally valuable. And all the temptations that we have day in and day out to define our value according to what they say, this truth should give you the ability to see straight through it and go, no, I don't buy that. In fact, we could ground it even further than that. On page 1 of the scriptures, that says that you are created in the image of the Most High God, the Imago Dei. Everything I've said today is grounded in the Christian worldview. Punchinello learned this lesson. One day, he met another Wemmick. Her name was Lucia. And Lucia got his attention not just because she was cute. See, Lucia did not have a single sticker. Not a single one. So Punchinello was different. They didn't like it. So they went to put gray dots on her, but the dots would fall off. And finally, Punchinello had had enough. He said, why don't you have any stickers? She said, Punchinello, that's easy. I go see Eli every day. Now, Eli was the woodworker at the top of the hill. And so Punchinello became curious enough one day that he walked up that big hill and opened that giant heavy door and walked into Eli's workshop. And he heard a big booming voice that greeted him and said, hello, Punchinello. And I always imagine Morgan Freeman's voice because Morgan Freeman. There's an argument. And Punchinello said, you know my name? He said, of course I know your name. I made you. And Punchinello couldn't let it go. He said, I want to know why Lucia doesn't have any stickers. Eli said, oh, Punchinello, Lucia has decided that the stickers only stick if they matter to you. And the more you trust in my love, the less the stickers matter. My favorite part of this little kid's book is the end. Because Punchinello doesn't fully understand. This is a gospel story. And that ending is all about grace. And grace is a tricky thing for us to understand. We don't get it either. That's why we have to be reminded of that gospel every single day, no matter who we are or what we've done or haven't done. But Punchinello walked out of that workshop and he thought to himself, I think he really meant it. And one of his dots fell off. One. Men and women, to the degree that we understand that we are human, that is established by science, and that we are intrinsically valuable in light of the kind of thing we are, endowed with the image of God, given that by him. We can't give that away, and no one can take it from us. To the degree that we understand that important truth, we begin to see exactly through the problems that the world puts on these types of issues like abortion. We understand that the unborn is our neighbor, bearing the same kind of nature that we do. And to the degree that we embrace that truth, you will become dangerous to a world like this one. So let me just warn you now. Dangerous in the best possible way. Because the world does not know what to do with people that it cannot define. That the stickers don't stick to. Those are the types of people who have the courage to stand up and speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. And every time you speak, I guarantee that you will instill courage in others. And the world will look on you like Punchinello looked on Lucia and wonder, what is it about them that makes them different? So I pray that that inspires you to stand up and make a difference when it comes to speaking up for our unborn neighbors. We are going to pause at this time, those of you at home, those of you here, to take a short break, and we will come back together for session 2 in just a few moments. Thank you so much.
When Christians are engaging society, it's important that we think about working in our own communities and neighborhoods. And this is especially true when we're talking about issues like poverty. It's easy to get caught up in a cause that is very remote and abstract from us, but it's harder to be a good neighbor to those right around the corner from us. So it's important that we're looking for the opportunities to change culture right in our own community. We sometimes want to change the world and forget to change our neighborhood. When we think about how to engage politics, we need to consider that all of us are called to steward our role as citizens. And that means that we need to be reflective on what it is that our society needs. And so much of the challenge that we face is about the breakdown of an understanding of the way that humans are made to flourish and how we can strive towards that. So we need to be reflective about the role of government, the limits of government, and also the role of the family and other institutions in society like church and like business and like other associations that people form. These are all contributing to the wholeness and flourishing of individuals. And we need to have these roles understood as we engage the political process. We need to express our perspectives in ways that invite others to reason with us and to engage in constructive debate about who we are as a society and what we seek together for the good.
I think a clue to answering that question is found actually in the question itself, probably revolving around that word portray. It's a great word of how do we portray life? How do we portray the gospel? And so often we tend to think of the gospel as something to be preached, not lived. When I would ask myself or people around me, how do we demonstrate the gospel? So often you get blank stares. No, we're not supposed to demonstrate the gospel. We're supposed to preach the gospel. And I guess if we're perfect enough, people will listen to us. And that's truncating the intention of the gospel. The gospel is meant to invade every aspect of who we are and to summon us to a different path that is aligned with the path that we were originally intended for as human beings in terms of who we are. What is the so what of the gospel? That's tied to how do we demonstrate the gospel? It's tied to what our role in this world is. I mean, St. Ambrose of Milan long ago once said, we do not seek to impose anything on the world, but instead we propose a more excellent way. And I don't think he's referring to some passivity. We don't want to speak up and speak truth when it's appropriate. That's not what he's referring to. But I think he's talking about that the gospel does not just need to be preached, which it does need to be and talked about, but it needs to be demonstrated. The gospel is not just propositional, it's plot. And it summons us into a story in which we're no longer the star of our own story, and we find significance outside of ourselves in accordance with the way that God is leading us. So I think that one of the ways that we can begin to portray the gospel is to see it being more than, not other than, but more than just ascribing to a belief system, an ideology, or ascribing to a biblical morality, which is different than a legalistic morality, but going to what is our impact in culture? How do we care for culture, not just scream at culture? How do we engage the heart? So often Hollywood gets the heart more often than the church does, yet the Scripture says the gospel is addressed to the heart. Issues of beauty, truth, and goodness infiltrating our embrace of the so what of the gospel. The arts. Do the arts matter? Does beauty matter? Does justice matter? And it's not just maintaining our own institutions as churches, but seeing us as these communities of new humanity that are to demonstrate, to portray what Jesus came to do in the first place. And that's getting us back to what we were originally intended to do. And that is to live in all of life to the glory of God, not just on Sunday mornings.
The Bible in 2 Corinthians 5:20 calls us as ambassadors for Jesus Christ. And I think being an ambassador requires a number of different skills, but one of them is we have to have knowledge, okay? Any ambassador needs to have knowledge not just of the truth, but also of the error. And what that looks like for us as Christians is that we need to have the truth. We got to know the truth about what it is we believe as Christians. What is the message that God wants us to communicate to the rest of the world? But notice, just having the truth is not enough. We also need to have knowledge of the error. And that's the false ideas of the culture, the false beliefs that people have bought into. Now, I believe this is essential for a couple of reasons, but one of them is this. We got to make sure that we understand the false ideas so that we do not become victims to that false belief and buy into it. And also the Bible teaches us that we want to know what those false beliefs are so that we can destroy them. This is what the Bible talks about in 2 Corinthians 10. And so what I love about Summit Ministries is that this is part of what they are so focused on doing, is giving Christians, ambassadors for Christ, knowledge not just in the truth, but also in the error. So they do want Christians to walk away from their experience at Summit knowing precisely what it is we believe as Christians, but also being able to identify, recognize, and see what's wrong with the false ideas that many of their friends in college, many of their colleagues and coworkers are also believing in this world. And that's why Summit Ministries is so critical for equipping Christians, our young people, to become the next generation of ambassadors for Jesus Christ.
Because we live in a relativistic society today, what that means is that truth is relative to the individual, that whatever they feel, they live out. And that certainly is being played out in a lot of circles in America's society today, particularly in the church, which is sad. Now, how can we engage this new generation that believes that truth is relative to them and truth is not necessarily absolute? Well, there's a few things that we can do as followers of Christ. Number one is, according to 1 John 1:6, if we say that we walk with Jesus, that we have fellowship with him, yet we walk in darkness, the Bible says that we are a liar and that we're not living out the truth. The first thing we have to do is make sure we live out the truth of Christ in our lives. Secondly, as a follower of Jesus Christ, we are commanded by Jesus to make disciples. This generation is hungry for fellowship and for community. In Titus chapter 2, we have a beautiful model. It tells us that older men and older women need to pour into the younger generation. That's a great model of discipleship. So one way that we can bring truth back into not just the discussion, but help this young generation live out the truth of the gospel is by discipling them in it. Another thing that we can do is invest in good resources. You know, when you think of Summit Ministries, we have great resources that are available for many people to go through. And so here's what we encourage people to do. As you make an investment into certain good resources that can teach you about the tenets of the Christian faith, how you can grow in your faith and how you can share your faith and even defend your faith, then take those resources and go engage a community of people that are maybe like-minded with you or may not be considered a Christian, but ask if they would like to join in a Bible study or a group study with you with some of these resources and teach them the truth of Jesus Christ. And finally, this is what I would say. Our churches need to make sure that we teach sound doctrine and that we make sure that the congregation is aware of the Christian tenets or Christian orthodoxy. What that means is, because we're seeing a high neglect, a disregard, if you will, of many pastors are teaching from the Bible. So in order for us to reach this generation with the truth of Jesus Christ, we have to teach from the Bible. So make sure that your church is soundly teaching from the scriptures, but not only that, but we got to make sure that we know what we believe and why we believe it.
Every student has a story, a place to be, deadlines, to-do lists, an image to maintain, friendships to grow, goals to achieve. But does all of this busyness add up to a meaningful life? Summit's a place where you go not only to see the bigger picture of what God's really doing in this world, but to get a sense of where you fit in that bigger picture. How can you live a bigger story in your own life than you ever imagined you would?
Before I came to Summit, I was questioning who God was, where He was, what His role still was in my life.
Oftentimes when you step into the culture, doing what everyone else is doing and saying, well, I know Christianity is true, but maybe I can just kind of compromise here and there and I'll be okay.
I think I had almost more of a secular worldview than I originally thought I did.
I think it's so hard to find truth and to be able to sit down and sort out like biblical truth because the world is just so noisy.
So if someone said to you, truth cannot be known, you're going to ask the question, do you know that's true?
One of the most important things for you to do is know what you believe and why. Not because mom said, not because the pastor said.
Ideas have what? Consequences, and bad ideas have what? Victims.
One of the really big things for me was getting a better understanding on the different worldviews.
Every successful person has a worldview, and we need to know what ours is.
Coming to Summit shaped my worldview entirely. I know what I believe, but I had no clue what other people believed.
Starting to ask questions is something that's been emphasized in every single lecture so far.
What does morality mean? Am I valuable? Is there an afterlife? We all have the same questions. Whether you believe in God or whether you don't, we all have to answer those.
The students learn you don't have to be afraid of any questions as a Christian.
I have a lot of questions, like they answer my questions and then I come up with more questions.
And providing ways that we can respond to these hard questions, but with love.
It's really a place where they're going to challenge you to think in a world that is just shooting ideas at you.
The small group, I think, is possibly the most important part of this.
It's amazing like how so many people who don't know each other at all can just draw close together.
When someone shares and is vulnerable, it allows you to feel that freedom.
The things that I carry into small groups, the way that those things are healed because of the way the Holy Spirit is there, it's been so sweet and such a grace.
Something that Summit has taught me, though, is like whenever it comes to the spiritual climb, you need people near you.
I've been really impacted by the relationships I'm developing and truly hearing each person's story.
Talking about the deep things in life, I think can really pull people together.
Trust builds here because you have the same goal and interest in mind. You're here to learn how to share the gospel with the world.
Am I going to have all this truth that I'm just going to hold inside of me, or am I going to start living it out in my life?
Knowing what you believe is getting increasingly more important because you're going to be challenged and because you're going to be pushed down. This is preparing us for the world that we live in now.
It's only 2 weeks, but it'll last me the rest of my life.
2 weeks, amazing speakers, loving mentors, lifelong friendships. Change the trajectory of your life forever, starting summer 2019.
Welcome back, everyone. Those of you on the live feed, welcome back. Good to have you with us. I love what that student said near the end of that video because it picks up exactly what Summit is about. The student said this: Summit is preparing us for the world we live in. And I want to tell you about 2 Summit students from this last summer. The first student, I'll call her Maggie. She was from Boston, Massachusetts, session 1. I got done speaking. I spent a whole day with the students giving them pro-life apologetics. And I hold an open forum out on the porch there, and we get a huge crowd every single time. And Maggie waited till the end of the night when I was done with the open forum, and she said, I need to talk to you. And at first I was nervous because I thought, I wonder if we're going to get a personal story here, because sometimes that happens at Summit. But she said, you need to know something. I live in Boston. I live around people who think I'm completely nuts for what I believe about Christianity. And I've been pro-life since the time I was 13 and been scared to death to say anything about it because nobody ever told me how to defend it before today. And I want to thank you, because now I feel I can go back to Boston and tell people why I believe what I believe on the pro-life issue. In session 3, I got done with my morning sessions on pro-life. I had gone to eat lunch in the cafeteria. I always eat with the students. And I was walking back, and over in the far, for those of you that take a tour later on, there's a staircase just off to that way in Summit, in the hotel. And I was walking along that staircase, and I made the turn to go down the next flight of stairs. And there was a whole group of students sitting there I learned from Dallas. And as I walked by, this girl said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, stop right there, stop right there. I need to talk to you." She said, "These are all the people from my youth group. And I came to Summit the first night, and I saw your name, and I saw the topic you were going to discuss, and I told all my friends, which you're here with right now, that there was no way you were going to change my mind on abortion, that I was pro-choice, and no way were you going to change my mind." And she looked at me and said, "You changed my mind," and broke down right there. And all her friends said, "Yeah, that's exactly what she said." You want to know why Summit matters? Because we're doing two things here. We're eyeing students who agree with us on some things on a Christian worldview, but their worldview isn't complete, it's inconsistent, and we're helping fill those gaps in their thinking. And that's what I love about this video. The students saying, "Summit prepared me for the world I live in." And that's why all the speakers at Summit are bought into this. This is why we look forward to it. We have shared that vision for students being equipped, and that's what we want to do. Okay, so what I want to do now is review briefly what you heard in the last session. The pro-life position comes down to this, a simple argument. Here's that argument. Premise 1, it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. That's premise 1. Wrong to intentionally human being. Abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. Therefore, abortion is wrong. It's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Abortion does that. Therefore, it's wrong. Now, to sum up and just bring back into focus what Megan shared with us, I want you to imagine we're about a month into the future and the holiday season is upon us, and you have relatives at your home who don't share your Christian worldview, they don't share your pro-life worldview, but they're around your table. How many of you have family members like that? So since I'm already picking on the city of Boston, let me continue to pick on Boston. Pretend you have an Aunt Betty from Boston who doesn't share your worldview, doesn't share your pro-life worldview for sure, and she's at your Thanksgiving table. And between bites of turkey and stuffing, she looks at you and says, "Now, why are you pro-life?" Here is how you're going to answer in a minute or less. You ready? In fact, I'm going to have somebody time me. Megan, you're going to time me on this, all right? In a minute or less, here's what you're going to say. Ready? Go. "Aunt Betty, I'm pro-life because it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. And you know what else, Aunt Betty? The science of embryology says from the earliest stages of development, you were a distinct, living, and whole human being. You weren't part of another human being like skin cells on the back of my hand. You were already a whole living member of the human family, even though you had yet to grow and mature. And you know what else? There's no essential difference between that embryo you were and the adult you are today that would justify killing you back then. Differences of size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency are not good reasons for saying we could kill you then, but not now." Now, I think I got that done in under a minute, did I? Oh, 45 seconds. Okay. At 59, I may be slow on the basketball court, but that's rocking it. Now, how many Bible verses did I cite? But did I communicate biblical truth? Yes, I did. And this is what today is about, men and women. You don't have to have all the answers. Oh, by the way, before I go any further, as I was going through that 1-minute defense, some of you were taking notes faster than broke people at a Dave Ramsey seminar, and you were thinking to yourselves, I really wish he had written that down somewhere. I know that was a terribly bad joke. It was awful. It's after lunch. The carbs are sitting in. I have to keep you awake. For those of you on the live stream, Diet Coke is okay right now. We're going to give you notes of everything that was said here today. In fact, when you leave, you're going to get printed notes. but we're not going to do it until the session is over, lest some of you be tempted to leave. If you do leave early, you will lose your salvation. And I'm a Calvinist, so you'll be in real trouble, all right? We're going to give you notes that outline everything that Megan and I have talked about in our sessions. But what I want you to see is, though I didn't give a long answer, I gave Aunt Betty a concise answer. And my friend Greg Kokel puts it real well. You know what our job is as pro-life apologists? It's not to have all the answers. You don't need to leave here today feeling like, oh boy, am I going to have every answer that could ever, to every objection that could ever be thrown at me? No, you don't have to have that. You know what you need to do? And I think Greg is right. Your job is to put a pebble in their shoe. Ever had a pebble in your shoe when you're out hiking? It wears on you and wears on you until you deal with it. That's your job as a pro-life apologist. And so what we're going to do now is look at the 6 bad ways that Aunt Betty and others like her respond to the case that Megan just presented us with. Megan presented a case based on science and philosophy. She presented a rational argument for the pro-life view. And it would be lovely if Aunt Betty and those like her would just fall to their knees, slap their leg and say, you know, it's really good that you're in my life to straighten out all my twisted thinking. Wouldn't that be great if that's how it worked? Now, those of you that have been married and your spouse straightens you out on something, do you do that with your spouse? Do you slap yourself on the knee and say, honey, it's so good God put you in my life to straighten me out where I really go wrong intellectually? No, that's not what you do. I know what goes on in your house. There's a couple days of passive-aggressive silence. There's a little bit of uneasiness for a couple of days, and then it works itself out because that's what married couples do, right? Don't some of you look at me and go, no, we're better than that. We fix it right there on the spot. All right, this isn't a marriage seminar. This is a pro-life seminar. The truth is the people we're talking to are not necessarily going to be won over on the spot, but your job is to give them something to think about. Here are the 6 bad ways that Aunt Betty's going to respond. Because she's not just going to say, thank you, you fixed me. She's going to respond. And the beauty of these 6 bad ways we're going to look at right now, you can take almost every objection you're confronted with and slot it into one of these 6 bad ways people argue, and it will begin to give you a framework for responding. Begin to help you formulate a response. Conversations on abortion are not Twitter flare-ups to be effective. Twitter is who can, as fast as possible, say something more dumb and more outrageous and more hurtful than the last guy. That's not pro-life apologist. A pro-life apologist is looking for ways to give people something to think about, whether he's talking to 1,000 people or a neighbor over a backyard fence. Here are the 6 bad ways people argue. The first thing they do, they confuse preference claims with moral claims, and I'll explain what that looks like. Then we'll look at how people assume rather than argue. The problem isn't that they argue. Usually the problem is they simply assume. Then we'll look at people who attack rather than argue. Then we'll look at people who assert rather than argue. And then we'll look at people who confuse functioning as a human with being a human. And finally, we'll look at those who hide behind the hard cases. Those 6 bad ways that people argue pretty much sum up what you hear on the street, what you see in academia, what you'll hear in the media, what your neighbor or classmates are likely to say to you. It's going to be one of these 6 things. The first bad way is people confuse preference claims with moral claims. I'm going to make 2 statements, and I want you to tell me the difference between the 2. Statement number 1, chocolate ice cream is better than vanilla. Some of you are going, that's gospel truth, that's fighting words, let's have at it right now. That guy's like, preach it, bro, let's go. Statement 2, it is wrong to torture toddlers for fun. Is there a difference between those 2 claims? What is the ice cream claim? What kind of claim is it? Don't say false. What kind of claim is it? Preference. It's about what I like as a subject. But when I say it's wrong to torture toddlers for fun, what kind of claim am I making then? A moral claim about what's right or wrong regardless of preferences. Is it possible to like something and still say it's wrong? Of course. My father-in-law, who's 85 and buys new Corvettes regularly, he's about ready to buy one of those new ones. I will be out in California, and I would love to take that thing on a joyride, shooting right up PCH, but even though I might get away with it because he's away skiing, I'm not going to do it. Why? Because it would be wrong. By the way, my father-in-law will not die in his sleep. He's going to die at 99, flying off a cliff on skis somewhere into the arms of Jesus. That's how he's going to go. I won't do it because it would be wrong. Even though I'd like to drive that vet, it's wrong to steal. Morality is about what's right and wrong regardless of preferences. The problem, men and women, our culture, when it comes to abortion, treats all moral claims like mere preference ones. Consider this bumper sticker. Don't like abortion? Don't have one. Have you seen that bumper sticker? Try this. Don't like spousal abuse? Don't beat your spouse. Don't like slavery? Don't own a slave. Anybody who said that today would be roundly criticized. But when it comes to abortion, people's IQ just drops like there's no tomorrow, and they suddenly treat everything as if it's a mere preference, like we're talking about ice cream, not right and wrong. And our job is to help them understand this. Years ago, there was a show on television called Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher. Some of you may remember that show. How many of you remember Bill Maher? Those of you that have your hands up, we're going to pray for you for deliverance after this. But Bill Maher was a comedian who hated conservatives, hated anything to do with religion, and he would typically have a program where there'd be 3 liberals ganged up on 1 conservative, which made it about even. And this particular night, he had as his guest Kathy Ireland, the supermodel. She walks on the set. Bill says to her, "Kathy, why aren't you pro-choice?" And Kathy says, "Bill, I used to be pro-choice, but then my husband went to medical school. And in order to stay conversant with him on issues he was studying, I began to read some of the same medical textbooks he was reading, his coursework. And I read in one of his embryology books that there's this principle in biology known as biogenesis that says living things reproduce after their own kind. That means that dogs produce dogs, cats produce cats, and human beings produce fellow human beings. And I reasoned from that if the unborn come from human parents, they too are human beings. And if they're members of the human family, Bill, we shouldn't unjustly harm them. And I believe elective abortion unjustly harms a member of the human family. And that's why I'm no longer pro-choice." Good answer? Grand slam. Clear the bases. Right? You ready for Bill Maher's reply? "Well, gee, Kathy, that's just your view." What did he just do? Did he refute her claim? What kind of claim did Kathy Ireland make? Preference or moral? Moral. What did he change it to? Mere preference, as if she were talking about ice cream. This is what the culture does to us on abortion, and we too often let them get away with it. No, we have to stop and recalibrate the person. We call this narrating the debate, where you stop and say, "Can I make an observation? I just made a truth claim that abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being. You didn't refute it. You just changed it into a preference one that you like better. What's the worldview idling behind this? Relativism. Relativism. Relativism is the belief that right and wrong are totally up to you to decide or your society, but there's no objective principles that we're supposed to get in line with. So you get people who say things like, "Well, who are you to force your morals on me? Who are you to push your morality on me? Who are you to say what's right or wrong when other people disagree?" That's relativism. And you see it everywhere in the culture today, especially on the issue of abortion. Well, how do we respond to this? We do a whole session on this with students at Summit because we find that students who come to Summit, many of them walk in to the 2 weeks they're going to spend with us absorbing a relativistic worldview that has been on them, a lot of them, since they went to high school and even middle school. And part of what we do here at Summit is confront that relativistic worldview because it's a huge barrier to understanding the Christian worldview. Why is relativism flawed? What goes wrong with it? Why should you never be silenced by it? Here's why. First, relativism is self-defeating. I'm going to say a few sentences, and I know it's after lunch. I know the carbs are setting in, but I want you to see if you can spot the flaw. Ready? My brother is an only child. I saw him on Oprah. I can't speak a word in English. Don't take anybody's advice on anything. You're in rare form as usual. Question authority. The Broncos are going to win the Super Bowl. No. What's wrong? What's wrong with all those statements? They self-defeat. The minute I say them, they fall apart. Here's what happens to pro-lifers. You lay out your case that the unborn are human. You make your case from science and philosophy, as Megan just did for us. And you know what Aunt Betty does? She looks at you and says, well, that's just your opinion. That's just your view. What worldview is Aunt Betty espousing at that moment? Relativism. And the problem is, relativism can't live with its own ground rules. As soon as you say you shouldn't impose your views on others, what have you just done? It's like saying there are no moral rules. Oh, but here's one. Don't impose your views on others. Be tolerant of everybody else. This is an argument that literally commits suicide. And yet millions of Christians have absorbed it. They confuse preference claims with moral claims. The second problem with relativism, you can't say anything is wrong, including intolerance. Mother Teresa? Adolf Hitler? Well, Mother Teresa liked to help people. Hitler, well, he liked to annihilate them. Who are we to judge? But we know better, do we not? And finally, as C.S. Lewis points out in Mere Christianity, you have never met another human being who's a true relativist. Because the very man who says, you shouldn't cut me off in line or you shouldn't steal my orange, and then turns around and says, oh, there are no objective moral principles, has just cut the ground from underneath his own complaint. This is the problem. People hear about abortion and they confuse the type of claim we're making. We are not claiming we dislike abortion. We're claiming it's wrong. And they have to answer the claim on our terms, not change it to something they like better. Second problem. Not only do people confuse moral claims with preference claims, they simply assume rather than argue. Megan gave you a tactic for doing this. It's called trot out the toddler. Every time you hear someone make a case for why abortion ought to be allowed, ask yourself instinctively, as Megan instructed you to do, would this work as a good argument for killing a toddler? You are not using the argument, or the tactic, I should say, to say the unborn and toddler are the same. You'll do that later when you argue science. Rather, you're showing that's the issue. You agree that we ought to be allowed to have abortion for any reason you want through all 9 months of pregnancy. You should agree that the government should get out of this debate. You should agree that pro-lifers like you and like me should stay completely out of this. You should agree that no one should tell a woman whether she can have an abortion or not. You should concede all of that if what? If the unborn are not human. But they got to answer the question, what is the unborn? They can't just assume the unborn aren't human. And Megan's trot out the toddler tactic is perfect for that. I got a 2-year-old in front of me. His parents can't afford to feed him. Should we be allowed to kill him so the parents can balance the checkbook at the end of the month? No way. Your reply? Why not? Well, because he's a human being. if the unborn are human like that toddler, should we kill the unborn for that reason? Well, that's different. The unborn aren't human, the toddler is. You might be right about that. You could be right about that. However, you're going to have to argue for it. You can't just assume it. And that's what's going on. How many of you have read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn? Any of you in this room? You may recall there's a jaw-dropping passage in chapter 32. Huck has been out on an adventure, and he happens on the property of Aunt Sally. And Aunt Sally sees him coming down the road. She rushes out to greet him, and she's mixed up. She thinks it's Tom Sawyer. It's really Huck Finn. And she rushes out to meet him and says, well, where have you been, my boy? I've been waiting for you. Where have you been? And Huck makes up a story. He says, well, ma'am, we were on a steamboat, and it blew a cylinder head. That's why we were late. It blew a cylinder head. Aunt Sally says, was anybody hurt? No, ma'am. It killed a Negro, but nobody got hurt. Well, that's good, said Aunt Sally, because sometimes people do get hurt. What was just assumed about the black man? That he wasn't one of us. Remember that question we started the day with? This debate is about who counts as one of us. Today, all Americans should embrace as a good thing. And when you would wonder, well, why would he say that? Listen to his exact words. Quote, because this is a nation where everyone gets to pursue their own dreams, end quote. Mr. President, does quote everyone, unquote, include the unborn? He simply assumed the unborn weren't human. He didn't argue for it. He simply assumed it. This is what you're up against. And Megan is exactly right. You trot out your toddler and you do not let them get away with making that assumption. You bring it back to the question, what is the unborn? You're not going to let them get away with it. Think about the most popular argument. I mean, watch TV for 2 seconds and Rachel Maddow is going to bring this up. If she doesn't, Nancy Pelosi will. They're going to bring it up within 2 seconds. Well, what about all those women who died in the back alleys of America before abortion was legal? Now, here's the mistake so many pro-lifers make. They go immediately to statistics. Well, statistics don't say that. They don't say that 5,000 to 10,000 women died every year. That's true, but wrong answer at that moment. There is fundamentally something going on there you need to address first. After you say to the person, you know what? You and I do have a source of common ground here. We both think that any woman who dies from an abortion, legal or illegal, is a tragedy. We share that concern. But notice, if I may, what you are assuming about the unborn. You are assuming the unborn aren't human because otherwise what you're telling me is that because some people will die attempting to kill others, we ought to make it safe and legal for them to kill others. But why should the law be faulted for making it more risky for one human to intentionally kill another completely innocent one? This is the assumption that you have to make. You have to assume the unborn aren't human, or that's exactly what you're arguing on illegal abortion. Now you're in a position to go for statistics. And I'll just tell you real quick, the statistics are pretty clear on this. And I'm not going to give you pro-life sources. I'm going to give you 4 pro-abortion sources that tell us the lie that 5,000 to 10,000 women died every year from illegal abortion, that lie is something the other side developed. It's not something that we can bear out statistically. Pro-abortion source number 1, Daniel Callahan in his book, Abortion, Law, Morality, and Choice. He is a pro-choicer. He says the claim that 5,000 to 10,000 women died every year from illegal abortion cannot be sustained statistically for this simple reason. Only 40,000 women of reproductive age die of all causes annually in the U.S. To say that so high a number comes from one source, illegal abortion, is beyond absurd. Source number 2, Christopher Tietz, Planned Parenthood's own medical statistician in the late 60s and early 70s, called the claim of 5,000 to 10,000 deaths a year unmitigated nonsense, unquote. Source number 3, Mary Calderon, Planned Parenthood's medical director, in the early 1960s in an American Journal of Public Health article in August of that year, said that the death rate from illegal abortion is so low it's not even worth commenting on. Why is it so low? Because the widespread introduction of penicillin has made all surgical procedures safe, and nobody is dying at the rate they used to die from surgeries, legal or not, because penicillin has reduced post-op affections to almost zero. Fourth pro-abortion source. Dr. Bernard Nathanson wrote a book in 1979 called Aborting America. Before he was fully pro-life, he was the co-founder of NARAL, the National Abortion Rights Action League. And in his book, which is a history of the pro-abortion movement, Dr. Nathanson says that he and Lawrence Lader intentionally made up the figure out of thin air of 5,000 to 10,000 deaths a year and sold it to the media who never questioned it. Notice we cited pro-abortion sources, but before we went to sources, please note, we dealt with the underlying philosophical problem, people assuming the unborn aren't human. We start there. Third bad way people argue. They attack rather than argue. I want to give you right now the 3 most important words for a pro-life apologist. And I want you to write these down. Word number 1, syllogism. Remember that syllogism we just gave you a moment ago? Premise 1, it's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. Abortion does that, therefore it's wrong. That's a syllogism. Word number 2 that is vitally important for a pro-life apologist, syllogism. Anybody want to guess what the third one's going to be? Boy, you guys are all prophets. This is amazing. Now, why would I say that? Because you may remember I started our time together by asking you how many times have you been in a conversation with somebody where they just changed the subject on you and did not keep the main thing the main thing. Megan presented an argument for the pro-life view. She argued from science that the unborn are distinct, living, and whole human beings. She argued from philosophy that there's no essential difference between that embryo you were and the adult you are today that would justify killing you back then. And our critics don't answer that argument. Instead, they attack us personally. Oh, you're pro-life? How many unwanted kids have you adopted? Oh, none? There goes your whole case. Hold it. Wait a minute. Let's go back to our syllogism. It's wrong to intentionally kill innocent human beings. Abortion does that. Therefore, it's wrong. Suppose you are a cruel, evil conservative and you don't give a rip about kids once they're born. Suppose you're that bad. How does your alleged unwillingness to adopt a child justify an abortionist killing one? And how does your alleged resistance to adopting a child refute the syllogism you just laid out? Could your syllogism still be valid and true even if you didn't live according to it? Yes or no? Of course. The critic has simply changed the subject. He has not refuted your pro-life argument. And we are in a culture today where this is what happens all the time. Oh, you're a man? What right do you have to speak on abortion? You know, I think right now I'm just going to start saying, in the age of Caitlyn Jenner, how do you know I'm a man? You know, that's quite an assumption in today's world, right? But beyond that, how does my gender have anything to do with the argument that I'm presenting? So here's a wild thought experiment. Suppose I am an abortionist 6 days of the week. I perform abortions. But one day a week, I go give pro-life lectures on why the pro-life position is true and reasonable to believe. Could my arguments for the pro-life view still be valid and sound even if I did not live up to them in the least? Yes or no? Yes. In other words, the arguments stand or fall apart from the person making them. We evaluate arguments for evidence. Does the conclusion follow logically from the premises? We evaluate them for soundness. Are the premises true? If they're not true, okay, the argument's no good. We throw it out. But instead of refuting our argument, they just attack us personally. How does my being a man refute the argument I just presented? It absolutely does not. It does nothing to refute my argument. It just attacks the person. That's called the ad hominem fallacy. Here's another one. Oh, you're pro-life, you're against all killing. What about capital punishment? What about war? You opposed to all war? There goes your whole case. Wait a minute. Did our syllogism say we're opposed to all killing? What did it say? It is wrong to intentionally kill who? An innocent human being. We never argued all killing was wrong. Our critic has attacked us by attacking a straw man. They've distorted the argument we're making. They haven't refuted it. We never argued all killing was wrong. We said it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Abortion does that, therefore it's wrong. Our critic never answered that argument. They just attacked us personally. Fourth bad way people argue. They confuse functioning as a human with being a human. In our third session together, I'm going to talk about a worldview known as body-self dualism. But I'm going to hold off on that for now. And instead, I'm going to ask you in just a moment to look around the room and stare at some people. So get ready on the count of 3. Those of you at home watching on the live feed, if you have a child nearby, grab them by the lapels, yank them over, and just put them right up here for the next few minutes if you want. But the rest of you, when I say go, I want you to look. Ready? Go ahead, stare at some people. All right? What makes us equal? Or if you will, what makes us valuable? Megan made a very good point in her session. If our value is based on traits that come and go, and we don't share those traits equally, human equality is a myth. Are we all equally self-aware right now? How many of you had coffee in the break? Not that decaf stuff that Satan invented. I'm talking about the real deal, all right? If you did, you're probably doing real well right now. If you didn't, you may be this side of comatose. I don't know. We're not equally self-aware in this room right now. Are we all physically equal in this room right now? No. I can tell you at age 59, I cannot play basketball like I did at age 21. But if physical ability is what gives us our value, if Planned Parenthood is right that we can intentionally kill a human fetus because it's not physically developed the way that we are, if they're right that development gives us our value and you have more of it than me, human equality is a myth. There's one thing we share equally as you were staring at each other a few moments ago. We all have the same human nature. I was thinking, wait a minute, it's afternoon. Don't go philosophical on me right now. What is a human nature? Well, all living things have natures that define the kind of things they are. Dogs have dog natures. Your pet turtles have reptile natures. Cats, I have learned, have satanic natures. You have a human nature that determines the kind of thing that you are. It sets your ultimate capabilities. From the earliest stages of development, men and women, you had a human nature. Your human nature came to be when you came to be. And as Megan pointed out so well at the conclusion of her talk, our human nature bears the image of our Maker. If you ground human equality in some kind of performance that we do that none of us share equally, human equality is out the window. Now, this is a key point I want you to take note of. Our culture loves to talk equality, but cannot ground it. Because they ground it in things that none of us share equally. We as Christians, and this is something we drive home to Summit students, when students come to Summit, they learn the true foundation for human equality. It's that we're image bearers who equally, in virtue of our humanity, bear the image of God. It's not because of functions that come and go that we don't share equally. All Summit students get that drilled into their heads. Why? Because we want them to leave knowing a true basis for human dignity and equality. And the secular world doesn't have an answer for that. Their definition of what makes us valuable is all over the map. Traits that come and go that none of us share equally. We actually have a foundation for equality. By the way, this is something Abraham Lincoln used expertly when he would debate the issue of slavery. Lincoln's critics would look at him and say, "Mr. Lincoln, that slave differs from us." And Lincoln would say, "So?" Does he differ from us in ways that justify enslaving him? And to quote Lincoln word for word almost, here's Lincoln's reply. You say man A is white, man B is dark. Oh, it is skin color then? The fair-skinned man having the right to enslave the dark-skinned man? Take care. By that rule, you're a slave to the first person you meet with skin fairer than your own. You say it's not skin color, it's a matter of intellect. The white man you allege has superior intellect to the dark man. Take care again. By that rule, you're a slave to the first person you meet with an intellect superior to yours. You say it is not skin color, it is not intellect, it's a matter of interest. The white man having it in his interest to enslave the dark man. Take care yet again. By that rule, you're a slave to the first person who can make it his interest to enslave you. Do you see what Lincoln just did there? All these arguments that people put forward to somehow dehumanize a victim class work equally well against those doing the enslaving. Peter Singer, Megan cited him, and I agree with her. One thing we like about Peter Singer, though his conclusion is barbaric, he's consistent. Singer says newborn is not self-aware, fetus isn't self-aware. You can kill both. Planned Parenthood, you're inconsistent because you want to draw an arbitrary line at birth when there's no line that can be reasonably drawn. At least he's consistent. When we talk about human value, men and women, we can be confident that our basis for it stands up in the real world. That we can actually say why humans matter because they have that foundation of being made in the image of their Creator. Final bad way people argue, they hide behind the hard cases. Two types of people are going to bring up rape. The inquirer and the crusader, and you're going to treat them differently. The inquirer is going to say, I understand your pro-life argument, I'm following it, but I just can't imagine telling my 14-year-old daughter she has to give birth if she were raped after that, because, you know, every time she looks at this kid, she'll remember what she went through, and I can't imagine telling her that. You look at the inquirer at that point, and you do this. You build common ground with her, and you say the following. You know what? You're right. That girl who's 14 and been sexually assaulted, she suffered an unspeakable tragedy. Do you know how many times, by the way, I've heard pro-lifers, when the issue of rape is brought up, just go right to statistics and say something like, well, most women who get raped don't get pregnant. How about showing a little empathy here? We're talking about sexual assault. Can we at least acknowledge this? You and I share a common thing. That woman suffered a terrible injustice. Given we agree on that, and given we agree that every time she looks at her child, she may remember what she went through. Given our agreement on those points, how do you think a civil society should treat innocent human beings who remind us of a painful event? Is it okay to intentionally kill them so we can feel better? Now, at that point, the inquirer, though not necessarily ready to come full circle, is at least following your logic and at least understands the worldviews in play. The crusader, he just wants to make you look bad. So I'm going to treat him differently. I'm going to call his bluff. All right, for the sake of argument, I'm going to grant that we allow abortion in cases of rape. Not my position, but I'll grant it for the sake of this discussion. Will you join me then in opposing all other abortions that have nothing to do with rape? What's the answer going to be? No, women have a fundamental right to an abortion. Okay, if it's fundamental, you cannot infringe on it. It must be absolute. In other words, abortion for any reason she wants through all 9 months of pregnancy. Why don't you defend that position rather than hiding behind rape victims? Call their bluff. Now, one other tactic that can be very helpful, and this gets back to what Megan opened us up with, bringing it back to the question, what is the unborn? A few years ago on a flight from Detroit to Orlando, last gig of the year for me, I'm beat tired and I'm ready to take a nap. And I'm thinking the Lord loves me because I had an exit row seat in the back of the 757 where you got 20 feet of legroom. I get to the back of the 757 and everybody's decked out in party gear. I'm thinking, what's going on? Turns out it's a bunch of people in their early 50s going on a cruise. I guess that's how they launched their midlife crisis. I don't know. But I sit down, and I've got a woman next to me decked out in party gear, her husband, and then the rest of that part of the plane. And her husband says to me, my wife will probably talk to you the whole flight. She's scared to death to fly. And I made a fatal error on that flight. I normally put my books in my bag and put them in the thing up above so I can take a nap. Well, I had a pro-life book out, and she saw it. And she says, oh, abortion. Oh, abortion's bad. It is. But you'll never convince me that a woman who's been raped shouldn't be allowed to have one. It's like, all right, we're into it now. I said, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? No. I said, how many humans are involved in a pregnancy that results from rape? 2 or 3? She looks at her husband and says, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3? 3. I said, you're right. You got the rapist, the mother, and the child. Yeah, 3. I said, let's talk about how we ought to treat each of them. Her husband's like, honey, this will not end well for you. I said, what about the guilty rapist? Should we kill him? No, I'm against the death penalty. It's horrific. Fair enough. How about the mother? Should we kill her for the rape? Are you crazy? That's what those Islamic countries do. That's barbaric. I agree. How about the child? Should we kill the child for the sin of his father? She said, I feel like you're cornering me. I said, I'm not cornering you. The argument is cornering you. And she said, I don't know, I need to think about it. And I backed off. By the way, when people say they need to let the pebble do its work. We're going to take a break, and we're going to come back after the break for our 3rd session, and I'm really excited about this 3rd session, so we'll see you in just a few.
I think as Christians, we should try to use effectively every communication medium that we have at hand, but we have to use them wisely and carefully. So for example, what about social media, where things get argumentative and people tend to attack? Should Christians even be there? Well, for the most part, I would say yes, but here's where we need to communicate differently. Rather than descending into chaos, descending into anger, taking cheap shots at people as straw men, I think Christians need to do 2 things. Number 1, we need to know what we believe and why. We need to communicate in an informed manner. We have a responsibility as Christians to know the truth and to proclaim it. So I've seen other people effectively use name calling to silence a debate, but as Christians, we can have nothing to do with that. We have a greater responsibility to speak truth and to do our homework. So part of what we should do in the world is so. Second, we need to do it graciously and with kindness. It says in the Bible that a gentle word turns away anger. I think as Christians, we should be characterized by those who are gracious towards other people. We're willing to listen. We don't take cheap shots. We don't build straw men. We don't participate in ad hominems where you attack somebody personally. We communicate, but we do it generously, we do it graciously, and we give other people the benefit of the doubt without backing down. So frankly, if Christians are able to get on social media and communicate truth and do it in love, I think that's a powerful formula for making a difference.
I think every generation of Christians all over again has to wrestle and be intentional to keep straight the story in the moment. We live in a cultural moment, and it's full of chaos, and it's full of deception, and it's causing a lot of havoc in a lot of people's lives, flipping reality upside down, denying reality in all kinds of cases. And so it's tempting to look at that moment and say, well, that's the real world. But what Scripture actually gives us is the real world. Scripture gives us the story of the world in which we find our moment. So we shouldn't just stand in our moment and try to make sense of Scripture. We've got to stand in Scripture and make sense of our moment. And the story of the world is centered around an event that has happened that will never change. No Supreme Court decision, no presidential candidate, no international conflict or militant religious group can ever put Jesus Christ back in the grave. So that's why when Peter is writing in his first epistle to a group of Christians who are just heading into some crazy cultural times, he writes them the book of hope. Paul writes the book of joy from a prison. Peter writes the book of hope at a time of emerging Christian persecution. And that hope is not wishful thinking. It's not a feeling. It's centered on a reality for Peter that Christ is risen from the dead. So no matter what happens, Christian hope is not a feeling. It's secure in this reality that Christ is risen from the dead. And only if we ourselves and encourage each other to keep straight the story in the moment, are we going to be able to live as people of hope in this culture. And what Peter then goes on to say is that that's what's attractive. Always be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks you for the hope that you have. Man, wouldn't it be great if a watching world would look at the church and go, man, those guys are nuts, but they're hopeful. And it's not just wishful kind of Pollyannish sort of thinking. It's grounded in the reality of being able to see things clearly from the perspective of the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
The whole idea of tolerance that we've kind of gotten into today's culture, knowing what love is and when you need to stand strong for what you believe.
How do I navigate all of this when the world says one thing, but God says the other thing?
They are being thrown into this world that's telling them all kinds of lies about themselves, all kinds of lies about their parents, all kinds of lies about God.
We've been doing biblical integration since really the school began, and I really feel like the purpose and the goal of it is for students to see that we don't have to keep God over here in this box, because He is in all things and He created all things.
And if you just really look closely, you can apply everything pretty much in the Bible to things we're going through today.
When I get scared, I know God parted the water for the Israelites, so He can take care of me.
My favorite part of Bible class is learning new things that you didn't know before, so you can be more like Him.
We've learned how God made us to be His image bearers.
You resemble God in your way of your actions.
They're looking at different worldviews. What do others say? What does the culture say? Comparing that to Christianity. You can't put a price tag on how important that is for the kids to see that now at a young age.
We learned about the Bible and science, that we could have a Christian worldview, and that you see everything that how God wants you to see it.
It's really cool to see having that foundation already set in place and then getting thrown into understanding the times where it talks about all these different other worldviews.
I think from before this kind of curriculum and before high school really even, you kind of have this okay, you have your spiritual sphere, your religion, and then you have everything else. And I think that this curriculum in particular does a really good job of showing you that they're one and the same, and that every question that you have in your reality sphere really can be answered somewhere in your spiritual sphere. And I think that that's a really important thing of me going into college next year, and just you're gonna have to be able to think about them for yourself.
To be able to share your faith better, you need to know what other people believe and why they believe it.
You can be the strongest Christian, but if somebody comes at you with another idea, what's to say that you won't believe it if you don't know the truth behind that idea?
The influence is too strong, I think, in the public realm to be able to defend against that without a proper background. And I think Understanding the Times does a very good job of providing that.
I started the year just telling them this is a safe place where you can ask any question. Let's see what Scripture has to say on it. What is truth? What about these controversial topics in our society?
I actually really appreciate those hard conversations, because it's one of the things that I know I would rather talk about it now in an environment like this than when I get to college.
I really do like that about the curriculum, that it lends itself to be able to be not very lecture driven, but more discussion oriented, because I think that's where the kids learn, is when they are able to articulate for themselves what it's saying rather than just trying to listen to me teach about it.
Relationships and truth go hand in hand, and because of the relationship we had, we were able to talk about truth, and because of the truth, we were able to strengthen our relationship. The spiritual core of our school comes from the teachers and the way that they bring just the gospel into everything that they do. And even though we're not constantly talking about it, there's still, how can we look at this from a Christian perspective?
They have to see you as a real person, and when they develop that relationship and they can see that consistently from teacher to teacher, they're way more open to ask those questions they may be afraid to before.
It's an idea war, and I think Understanding the Times is all about giving teenagers the tools they need to fight that idea war well.
And I'm excited about that as an 8th grader, they're having conversations that I never had until I was in seminary.
I'll have people who are freshmen in college email me and be like, all that stuff you were saying, like that's really happening. Like I'm having these conversations with my professors or with fellow students.
To be able to have a class where you focus on what does that mean, what do all those isms that are out there, what do they look like, to be able to have the time set aside in every single day that these students are here to learn about that, to me is just as important as learning AP Calculus or physical science in 9th grade, that you have to have it. And I want it to tie back into then their core academics.
Our prayer would be that this foundation, that we start using this curriculum and balancing it with talking through everyday things, would help them to trust in that truth that God is so real forever.
We often wonder whether there is any hope for the world today.
Why do we have conflict? Does my life have any meaning?
Good ideas enable us to flourish, but it often seems that bad ideas are winning the day.
What people call love is just a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed.
So either I'm God or truth is relative.
I've come to believe that most people fall prey to one of 5 idea viruses.
Imagine the entire world being a secular place, not a sacred place. Darwin did that with the human person.
We see karma in Hinduism, we see karma in Buddhism, simply the idea of cause and effect.
Postmodernism has kind of indoctrinated people into believing that there are no objective moral norms.
Socialism says we all own it. When we all own it, nobody owns it. When was the last time that you washed a rental car?
Do you have the hope that you are confident of your salvation? And now I've never had a Muslim say to me, yes, I'm confident.
A growing number of people wonder, not just if God exists, but whether the question of his existence even matters.
In the busyness of life, it's easy to feel like God is absent.
We find ourselves locked in mortal combat in a secret battle of ideas about God.
As that video so ably points out, here at Summit, we're involved in a battle of ideas, and I want to give you a reason why that matters. I've been doing an informal poll of students attending the Summit Summer Conferences, and I've been doing this informally for about 3 to 4 years, where I would ask students at the open forum after my pro-life talks, how many of you prior to coming to Summit have heard in your churches a pro-life apologetics talk aimed at equipping you to talk about abortion with unbelievers. Now, on an average of about 180 students a session here in our summer conferences, we are lucky to get between 7 to 9 that raise their hand and say they've heard anything of that nature. If I go further and say, how many of you have heard anything at all about assisted reproductive technologies or euthanasia and doctor-assisted suicide, the numbers get even more dismal. You know why these summer conferences matter? And I'm telling you this as a faculty member. I'm not a paid Summit staffer. I'm a faculty member. And I'll tell you why these conferences matter. We are getting students, even from some of the best churches in the country, that are coming to Summit that have no distinct Christian worldview on the issues of human life, what makes humans valuable in the first place, and the first exposure they're getting to that is right here. So when Jeff in that video talked about a battle of ideas, that's the battle that we're engaging here at Summit. And I hope, if you'll allow me to do this, I hope each of you will go back to your churches, talk to your youth leaders, talk to your pastoral leadership and say, I want our kids at the Summit conferences this summer. We need them there. They need to be equipped to engage this battle of ideas. Because if we don't equip them, men and women, they are going to be swept away, or they will be non-effective in their witness for Christ because they will lack the confidence to engage. Both of those outcomes are disasters for our side. So I hope you will do as that video suggested and join us in equipping students to engage this battle of ideas. It's essential that we do so. We're going to do something a little different in this session. We're going to split the time between a little bit of lecture from me and then a conversation that Megan and I will have about some of the things we're getting in the field. What are the worldviews we're hearing from students? What are the things we're hearing about? But before we do that, I want to walk you through some underlying worldviews that come into play in debates over abortion, in debates over bioethics in general. And though we won't be able to get into these underlying worldviews in great detail, you will have enough of an oversight on this to know where to go to get more on what's really going on. The first worldview we want to talk about right now is a worldview known as morphological freedom. Morphological freedom goes like this. I have a right to literally morph into whatever I want to be, is a simple way to define it. It's a self-construction narrative that says I have freedom to use technology to reinvent myself any way I want to reinvent myself. I have the freedom to be in terms of how I identify, however I want to be. I can make myself whatever I want to be. That's morphological freedom, and you see it all over the place. Of course, not just in the culture on the popular TV, but you see it in debates over bioethics. But what you may not know is that morphological freedom actually is being sold to us in premises that all of us are exposed to daily. For example, I want you to think about social media for a moment. What does social media advance as a premise to each one of us? I can selectively choose what parts of me I let you see. I can make myself whatever I want to be on social media, and nobody can question it. I can go on Twitter and be something. I can make my Facebook profile whatever I want to be. And the premise there, innocent as social media might be as just an abstract principle, is actually beginning to ingrain in us this idea of morphological freedom. The idea that we can be whatever we want to be and no one can question it. It's just there. How about questions over assisted reproductive technologies? This is one of the topics we cover at Summit, assisted reproductive technologies. Infertility is an unbelievably heartbreaking thing for couples to face. If you doubt that, allow me to share with you what a graduate school professor of mine did. He brought his wife in who had suffered from breast cancer and infertility, and she had had double mastectomy, almost died from breast cancer. And he asked his wife in front of our class, honey, if you had to go back through infertility or breast cancer, you had to go back and go through one of those again, which would you pick? And she did not hesitate for a moment. I'd take cancer over infertility. It's that painful, emotionally. Think about what infertility feels like. And how many of our churches are talking about this? And here's the danger. Morphological freedom tells couples suffering from infertility that they can use any means possible to construct children for their own parental desire, and as long as they get the kid that they want, everything's okay. Even if we destroy thousands of embryos in the process. Children being received is idling in the background on all these debates over abortion, over doctor-assisted suicide. How about the whole gay marriage, transgender debate that's going on right now? Morphological freedom says, not only do I have a right to decide what, quote, me is, unquote, I can make me into anything I desire. This is what's idling there. The idea that the body has no intrinsic purposes, the idea that I alone am sovereign in determining who I am, that's the idling worldview that is driving a lot of these issues related to bioethics. How about abortion itself? How is the abortion debate itself beginning to reflect this? Well, let me just review with you very quickly a couple of titles that are quite popular. Katha Pollitt has written a book called Pro, and the subtitle is temporarily escaping me, but I'll think of it in a moment. But basically her argument is, reclaiming abortion rights. The idea being that the way we win the abortion debate is to quit apologizing for abortion. Do you remember Bill Clinton when he became a candidate for president? He said, I want abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. Remember that? Okay, that's now off the table. Katha Pollitt says, why does it need to be rare? Why are we apologizing? And she has a point, because as soon as you say abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, what's the obvious question that presents itself? Why? If there's nothing wrong with abortion, who cares how many there are? And Katha Pollitt gets this. So Katha Pollitt says, I'm going to write a book called Pro, Reclaiming Abortion Rights, and here's her argument. Vacuuming out your uterus is no different morally than vacuuming out your house. You don't apologize for vacuuming out your living room. Stop apologizing for vacuuming out your uterus. If you have the power, and if your identity says you need an abortion, you owe no one an explanation, period, regardless of what stage of pregnancy. Over in the UK, which, by the way, we just had a terribly tragic event go down in the UK. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but basically the British government imposed on Northern Ireland abortion on demand. Northern Ireland had resisted it. They have now been told they will embrace that, and they will embrace gay marriage, and it's being forced on them. But Northern Ireland was holding out when the Southern Republic of Ireland had voted to allow abortion wholesale. Northern Ireland was holding out until the UK government at Westminster forced it upon them. But the leading UK abortion rights apologist, a gal by the name of Anne Ferretti, sounds like a pro-lifer. Anne Ferretti would stand on this stage and echo everything Megan just told you. She would argue that there's no essential difference between a late-term fetus and an early-term fetus. In fact, Anne Ferretti mocks those who draw developmental lines on abortion, who say that this child over here can be killed because it's only 2 weeks old, while this one over here at 28 weeks can't be killed. She says that distinction is completely without rational merit. You know the SLED acronym Megan gave you? The differences of size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency? She would agree with all that. And yet, here's her conclusion. If women are to have power over their own sovereignty, they must be allowed without apology to have abortion at any point in the pregnancy they want. This is the idea that I can become whatever I want even if I squash the rights of others. That's morphological freedom that we're up against. How does that relate to a Christian worldview? Well, the Christian worldview tells us a different story. I don't have the right to become whatever I want. You know why? Because I don't belong to me. I've been bought with a price. I've been bought by the King of Glory, who looked at me, saw my sinful rebellion, and still sent Jesus to die in my place as my sinless substitute. And the Bible says that I no longer am my own. I belong to him. And morphological freedom isn't the target I'm aiming at. Christ-likeness is the target that we're to aim at. Morphological freedom isn't bad because it's promoting freedom. It's bad because it's promoting unrestricted freedom with no bounds whatsoever. And that is why you're starting to see a little bit of shift in the abortion debate away from trying to justify abortion as, oh, well, it's not really killing a person, to, so what? Women have the choice. Deal with it. Second worldview we're dealing with is what we call body-self dualism. And I want to give you the title of a book that I think is the best layman's treatment of this topic out there right now. And both Megan and I would agree on this. It is by Nancy Pearcey, Love Thy Body. In fact, I do believe I think it's in the bookstore. I'm almost certain it's in the bookstore. Nancy has done a wonderful job looking at this problem, but let me define body-self dualism for you. Body-self dualism is the belief that the real you is not your body. In fact, your body has nothing to do with your identity. Your body is mere evolutionary matter in motion. That's it. There's nothing intrinsically valuable in your body. Rather, the real you is your thoughts, your desires, your aims, your cognitive abilities. That's the real you. Until you have those, or once you lose those, you are no longer you, no longer a person with rights. and your rights can be overridden by actual persons who still possess that. That's body-self dualism. Of course, it's easy to see how this fits in the abortion debate. We can kill fetuses who are less than cognitively aware because they don't measure up. And by the way, if you want a chilling example of this, look no further than David Boonin, who teaches philosophy at the University of Colorado at Boulder, not far from here. I'll paraphrase what he argues. Boonin says, you are identical to the embryo you once were. That was you back then. That wasn't a blob of cells, that was you. However, you don't have the same right to life then as you do now because you lack cognitive ability. So yeah, that's you back there, but you have no value until you get that. And to make sure we don't miss this, he cites his son Eli. He says, I got a picture of Eli on my desk. Eli is at 24 weeks before birth. He's got a sonogram image there. He's sucking his thumb. He is clearly the same boy that is in the other pictures on my desk, but the thesis I advance in this book is it would have been perfectly permissible to end his life at that point. Why? Because Eli lacks cognitive desires that are immediately exercisable. And you can see where this goes. The results of this are, as Megan pointed out already, you get savage inequality. If you have more desires that are immediately exercisable than I do, well, then you have greater rights than I do. Human equality is out the window. You can't have it both ways. You can't argue desires give us value and then say those who have more of them don't have more rights than those of us who have less. But what's really interesting about this, they never tell us why those things are value-giving in the first place. Megan pointed this out, and she's right. They never say, why is that decisive and not something else? They just assert it. But body self-dualism is also counterintuitive. I want all of you right now to look at this sign, or this screen, that says, beware the undercurrents, worldviews in play, all right? When you are looking at that, you are doing both a bodily action and a mental action. Your body, your eye, your physical eye sees the sign, but your mind makes sense of it. You are doing both body and mind activity. In other words, the real you is not just your mental, it's both body and mind. The Christian worldview would hold to what is known as a substance view. You are a dynamic union of body and soul. You're not only body, you're not only soul, you're a dynamic union of body and soul. Body self-dualism says, no, you're just your thoughts. How many of you have ever been hugged by your mother? Can I see your hands? Not if body self-dualism is true. Can you hug desires, aims, feelings? No, you hug bodies. Which means if body self-dualism is true, you've never been hugged by your mother because you can't hug those things. And yet the world is buying into this notion that the real you has nothing to do with your body, only your mind. There's a third worldview in play, and it goes like this. We should stay away from all metaphysical questions. This is a view called metaphysical neutrality. It sounds very big, very complex. We're going to make it simple. Metaphysics is not a word that should scare you. Metaphysics is simply answering questions about ultimate reality. Is truth real and knowable or just a preference? That's a metaphysics question. What are human beings? What is the nature of human beings? Are we body and soul or just material? That's a metaphysics question. What is the nature of reality? That's a metaphysics question. It just has to do ultimately with what's real. The view we're getting in the culture now is that Christians should not bring their views on abortion to the public square because Christians are engaging in speculative metaphysics, meaning ultimate worldview questions, while the secularists who support abortion are not. They are neutral, so the argument goes. So you get Senator Gillibrand from New York, who back in June said that the pro-life side should be fundamentally disqualified from all public debate on abortion. Fundamentally disqualified. What was her rationale for saying that? Because our view is inherently religious, and the religion of the minority should not be imposed on those who disagree. Now, idling beneath that is this view that somehow we should never bring larger worldview assumptions to debates about abortion, especially if we're going to bring public policy to the table. The problem, men and women, is that everybody does metaphysics on abortion. Everybody. Nobody can escape this. For example, here's the pro-life worldview. Humans have value because of who they are, in virtue of the kind of thing they are. Creatures that bear the image of their maker, and thus they have intrinsic value, as Megan pointed out. What's the pro-choice worldview, the pro-abortion worldview? Humans don't have value in virtue of the kind of thing they are. They only have value if they have a certain degreed property that they have developed. Notice that both views are answering the ultimate question, what makes humans valuable in the first place? Do you see that? And yet what they try to do is throw ours out as being metaphysical when theirs is every bit as metaphysical. Everybody's doing this. Everybody brings worldviews to the table. And what's happening in the culture is a full-blown, full-court press to shut out the pro-life view because its alleged tie to metaphysics, when in reality, all views on abortion bring a metaphysical viewpoint to the table. Everybody does. Either you believe each and every human being has an equal right to life, or you don't. Both sides are doing that same worldview analysis. So that's the larger worldviews that are in play. But there's one internal thing going on you need to be aware of within the pro-life movement that is a very big threat to us getting our message out effectively. And just before I bring Megan up to chat with her about what we're seeing together in the field as we talk to students on these underlying worldviews I just mentioned, I want you to be aware of a rival to worldview thinking. My view is this: you should engage people at the worldview level, when necessary, address their underlying worldviews to open them up to consider the pro-life view. However, there is a rival view within pro-life that says, no, the real problem is we face a root cause problem. And root cause thinking differs from worldview thinking. And this will all be in your notes, as I mentioned at the beginning. Here's root cause thinking. We can't solve abortion if we don't first solve all the underlying issues that cause people to abort in the first place. So that means if we're going to solve abortion, we have to solve poverty. We have to solve the fact that people don't have the jobs they need. We need to show that we are pro-abundant life and solve every conceivable life extension issue that's out there. We need to be pro-immigration. We need to be pro-refugee. We need to be opposing poverty. I've even seen articles that say the opioid crisis is a pro-life issue. There are whole conferences within evangelicalism. I won't name them, but they meet in Washington, D.C. They are evangelicals who stand up and say, your pro-life credentials are not legitimate unless you're taking on all these other issues. This is extremely dangerous thinking to the pro-life witness on abortion. Frederick the Great put it well, he who attacks everywhere attacks nowhere. What does this look like in the real world? Are people like Megan and I supposed to spend Monday fighting abortion, Tuesday fighting the refugee crisis, Wednesday fighting poverty, Thursday fighting the opioid crisis? I mean, you see where this goes. This is insane. If we stand in front of a high school, last year we reached 72,000 students at LTI. Are we supposed to take 5 minutes of our talks to talk about abortion and then we have to work in all these other issues? What does that mean? And how are we supposed to spread our resources to even deal with all that? Most pro-life groups you meet are completely broke. Do they have money to take on all these other issues that people with bigger budgets are more than willing to take on? Look, just because you oppose the intentional killing of an innocent human being does not mean you have to fix everything wrong with society. What would you think of the American Cancer Institute? Suppose a critic said to them, you're not really concerned about health because you only deal with one disease, cancer. What about heart attacks? What about diabetes? What about childhood obesity? I mean, we would think that was insane. Or what if a Christian daycare center opens in the inner city and they allow kids to come to them between 3 and 5 p.m. weekdays so moms can go home and make dinner? But the rest of the time they're closed. Would anybody go to that Christian daycare inner city ministry and say, why aren't you open 24/7? What are you doing about older kids? What are you doing about gang violence? What are you doing about the root causes that cause these kids to grow up in poverty in the first place? No, we applaud them. It's only you, pro-lifers, who are told you have to take on all these other things to earn your pro-life credentials. And I want to tell you, men and women, that is bunk. Do not fall for it. Now, as Christians, will we care about a lot of issues? Yes, we will. But it doesn't mean our operational objectives are going to be that broad. And the danger here is, even if we did everything that our critics are demanding of us, suppose we took on all those other causes. Would pro-abortionists suddenly become pro-life? If we did everything they said, would they? Would they help us stop abortion? No, they wouldn't. It's one gigantic smokescreen. So your job is to deal with the underlying worldview issues which helps us solve abortion. Your job is not to take on every conceivable job under the sun, fixing everything wrong with society to somehow earn your pro-life credentials. That's not fair to pro-lifers, and it's not fair to you. So what I want to do now is bring Megan up for our final 20 minutes, and we're going to talk together. We're just going to have a conversation about what we're seeing in the field. Megan is one of our top speakers, you already know that, and we actually have 2 other speakers at LTI that go into schools. Our focus is to go into Catholic and Protestant high schools and do assemblies and do talks where we reach students with pro-life apologetics content. Now, a lot of groups go in and talk about abstinence and chastity. We support groups that do that, but that's not what we do. We do the pro-life apologetics. And I thought it might be helpful if you got a sense of what we see on the road and what we pick up. So, Megan, I got a question for you to start off.
Okay.
On this question of body-self dualism, give us an idea of some of the things you've heard from students that indicate that this is indeed a challenge that we have to be ready to talk about.
Oh, it's all over the place, really. But I think the number one thing I run into goes back to that body-self dualistic idea that somehow my feelings, my thoughts, that's the real me. And so when they begin thinking about the things that I've said, they'll say, you've made some really good arguments, and I understand all that you've talked about, but what about when these situations arise? Mm-hmm. What about when this happens? Because suddenly that changes the feelings-based center towards an issue. So I see that quite a bit, but I also, when I have time to do Q&A with students, unpack body self-dualism for them. Because I don't think people walk around and say, oh, well, I'm a body self-dualist. It's not something that people claim to be, but it is there.
I dare you to post that on social media today.
That wouldn't be your view anyway. No, but the ideas that are running underneath, they are there in such a way that when I begin to unpack it, I have students raising their hands and putting the dots together and going, wait a minute, what does this mean for things like euthanasia or physician-assisted suicide? Wouldn't that mean that if that person has lost their mental faculties, that there's no longer a person there? Is that the view driving that? They begin to understand the connections behind. So both sides, they fall prey to it in terms of reasoning through, but the moment that you satisfies the true me, well, then no wonder people are having casual sex. But what we're seeing, the outcome of that is that the Christian view, the substance view, that our body is so much a part of what we are that you can't separate the two, that's the reality that we're seeing play out, because what we do to and with our body does affect us. And the secular statistics are showing that with the increase in things like depression and things like suicide. It's incredible.
One of the things you'll hear from pro-life sources is that we are winning the debate with students, that this younger generation is very pro-life. There are pro-life leaders who will say things like, this is the generation that's going to end abortion. I'm not so sure. And one of the reasons I'm not so sure is I meet enough students who have bought pro-life. You know what their pro-life conviction really comes down to? They don't like anything that looks mean. Abortion looks mean, therefore they oppose it. But guess what else looks mean to these students? Denying someone the right to marry whoever or whatever they want. They think that's mean too. In other words, under body self-dualism, my body tells me nothing about what I ought to do morally. My plumbing means nothing. All that matters is up here in my desire. And that's why you have people who identify as men when they're really women. That's why you get the transgender activism that you see today. And these very same students who tell us they're pro-life, push them hard enough, and they'll think it's mean if you restrict a woman's right to choose when you come right down to it. Yeah. And they certainly don't vote pro-life. So this idea that we're winning this fight at the worldview level, I think can be challenged. I don't think the evidence will support that. And I realize I'm not giving you an empirical study here. I'm giving you what we're seeing in the field on this.
Yeah, I think the flip side of that, because when we do engage it, and that's what happens, it does happen here at Summit. I've seen it happen. I've walked with these students because I live here, so I'm here for most of the sessions the entire time. Is there are also positive things about this generation. You're absolutely right, because I run into the same types of things. There's an intense fear of not being kind or not being perceived that way. I think that's where this view of morality being subjective is coming from. This, I don't want to tell someone they're wrong, because that would be in some way unkind to them, right? So the intentions to be kind are there, but once you point out what's really going on, and that viewing morality as it truly is, as something that is objective, in which case that means that when I say that abortion is wrong, I'm making a statement about reality, the kind of statement that, because it doesn't rest on me, could be right or wrong. That's actually a humble stance in a world and as soon as you begin to unpack that for them, they begin to retool their understanding of kind. The positive things that we see here at Summit is that this generation is incredibly energetic. Oh boy, they're hard to keep up with. They see the suffering in the world on a global level because of the technology that they have. So unlike me when I was younger, I saw suffering. I saw it on the news each night. I saw it in the community in which I lived, in my own school, in my own context. They see it all around the world from 14 angles, right? And they want to fix it. So when they think about fixing the world, they want to do it at a global level. So they do care about these things. And as soon as you can tap into what's going on under the surface and help them understand, their energy is directed in a very positive way, which is incredibly encouraging.
One of the other areas we see here at Summit, and it certainly frustrated me at first, and I think from our previous conversations it frustrated you, was on the question of morphological freedom. We introduced a bioethics talk to the Summit students about 5 years ago, and we are constantly modifying that thing because of just the changing nature of where these students are coming from. But one of the things I would do is throw out a case study to these students. If you had an opportunity to take an enhancement therapy that would fundamentally alter your biological DNA, but would give you cognitive abilities way beyond any other human being, and that therapy would affect your descendants as well, are there any yellow or red flags from a Christian worldview that say maybe you shouldn't just rush headlong into that? In other words, we're talking here about altering the nature of human beings through a therapy, their biological nature. We were finding, at least in my Summit sessions, a lot of pushback from students saying, well, what's wrong with that? Why shouldn't we do that? Why not? Yeah. And I want you to take a few minutes and talk about how you help students see this through the use of media. We decided we were tired of trying to fight this on terms they couldn't understand. I mean, think about it. This generation has been raised on superheroes.
Yeah.
I mean, I wear a Spider-Man shirt. I have a shirt I lecture in. It's got Spider-Man, Iron Man, Captain America, and the students marvel at my shirt. That's a bad joke. But anyway, you get the idea. I'm sorry. But this is a generation raised on these. So what did you do to kind of start them thinking about, wait a minute, maybe there's some fundamental questions we need to answer first.
Yeah, it was what happened to me is what it was, because I was coming up on my turn to give the same talk that summer. And I was thinking through that after you had experienced the first session and had that kind of pushback. And I was praying about this. I'm like, Lord, how do we help them see that there's something not okay here? And I was wrestling and wrestling. And I remember I was on a speaking trip with my husband, Tripp, who he works here at Summit as a director of programs. And we were in Denver. We were supposed to be flying back to Atlanta, and we got snowed in. And I was so angry. We'd missed our flight there in Denver. And he's like, we're going to turn this into a positive. We're going on a date night. So he took me to see Wonder Woman, which I had been wanting to see. And just number one thing, when your wife is a pro-life apologist and you take her to movies, you just kind of learn to deal with the fact that there's going to be a different kind of movie-going experience. My kids hate watching movies with me because I stop the movie, we have to talk about this. So I was watching Wonder Woman, and it got to the end of the film. Great film, by the way. And just like in the other films, Superman would be another example. There's a lingering sadness that the character experiences at the end. The reason is that she is a divine character. She's not human. And here she is in a world, living in a world not fit for her, but longing for this kind of ideal human existence. And in that moment, the Holy Spirit just struck me blind. I was like, oh my goodness, that's it. And so what came out of that was men and women, when I was talking to the students, and we always address them as men and women because that's what they are. If we were to enhance our nature to such a point that we surpass human nature, in other words, if the transhumanist movement takes flight and we're no longer human in the way that we once were, and if our goal is to achieve this ideal human existence, and I think that is the goal of people trying to strive for these things, if we take these enhancements, if we do these steps and surpass our nature, we will never achieve our goal because we won't be human anymore. We'll be living in a world not fit for us. Who wants to be immortal in this world anyway? That's usually the question that gets them. They're like, well, yeah, listen.
Yeah. And notice that we have a generation of students that is rushing toward enhancement, rushing toward bettering ourselves, but they can't tell us what better means, and they can't tell us what human means.
Yeah.
This is, again, something our churches need to take account of. What are we teaching our students about what it means to be made in the image of God and to be truly human as a result? And that leads to something else I want to take some time with before we let you all go. We need to send these people home with something to do.
Sure.
We need to give you an assignment, and we want to give you some tools for fulfilling it. So what I think all of you need to do, and if you oppose me, you're welcome to oppose me. You'll be wrong, but you can. Here's what you need to do. Our churches, your churches, are full of people who have not been taught to defend the pro-life view. After this session today, you actually know how to defend the pro-life view. And when you see the exquisite notes we have given you, you will have no doubt about that. And you can pick up books like my book, The Case for Life, in the bookstore, and my book, Stand for Life, if you want further assistance on that. But here are 3 things every kid and every Sunday school in your church needs to be able to do. How many of you have churches where there's a Sunday school program? Okay, good. Youth groups? All right. You need to start working on your youth pastor. And you need to begin, you have 2 options there. You can give the talk yourself, which I'm going to tell you how to do in about 90 seconds. Or you can call one of our staffers. Megan lives locally here, and we can get a speaker out to you. But here's what your youth group must understand. Number 1, they need to understand a biblical view of human value, that we are made in the image of God, and abortion is an assault on that biblical view of human value. They need to know how to simplify the issue. Trot out your toddler, the example we gave you. This debate is not about choice, privacy, or trusting women. It's about one question: what is the unborn? That's where the whole debate stands or falls. Then, let's say you forget all that, and all you can remember is, okay, they argued science and they argued philosophy. Distinct, living, whole human being. You give them that, And let's say you then go through SLED with them. There's no essential difference between you, the embryo, and you, the young adult, that would justify killing you. Differences of size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency. That's that SLED acronym we talked about. None of those are good reasons for saying we could kill you then, but not now. Let's say you have 10 minutes to talk to these kids. In addition to giving them that, you show this video. Let me go a step further. If all you did is show this video, can you imagine the profound impact that would have on the students watching this? We're a generation that learns about the world visually. They used to learn about it through TV. Now where do they learn about it? Their phones. And the visuals help overcome at a visceral level the roadblocks people have to believing in the pro-life view. So those are some things you can do. The notes will help equip you with that and will help give you a step forward. Megan, what are you seeing in schools as relates to students who claim that maybe they were raised Christian, but now they're falling away, they don't want anything to do with it anymore, and they hear a pro-life talk based on science and philosophy? How does that help? How have you seen that help point them back to Christianity?
Yeah, well, because we're talking about human dignity, and that's the basis when we're talking about pro-life issues or bioethics issues, it comes back to what does it mean to be human, that most fundamental question. So what I find when I'm doing my job, when I'm teaching apologetics, is that these conversations lead to gospel conversations more than any other conversations that I have. And so even yesterday with the student body, I was at a school in Fort Worth, Texas yesterday morning, flew in just before the snow, praise God for that, and got here. But I spoke to 900 students for 50 minutes, and they sat still and engaged. I could see their faces, and I'm asked all the time, I don't think high school students would really be interested. I don't think they'd pay attention. I can tell you that's not true. They were listening with rapt attention, so much so that a group came up afterwards and talked to me for so long that their teachers had to come and go, no, you really have to eat today. You have to go to lunch, and then you have class. And they were like, well, just 5 more minutes. Can you walk with us to class, Megan? Can you do this? Because they had questions, and they wanted to know more. So the more questions they have, all apologetics does, it's important to understand this. The things that we gave you today paves potholes. That's what my professor, good Dr. Kevin Lewis said. Paves potholes. So when they bring up their objections, what ends up happening is these materials help you kind of push those objections aside, those obstacles aside, and it clears the path. And I cannot tell you the number of times I can name students on a first name basis. I can remember a boy named Michael. I can remember a girl yesterday named Ashley. And these objections that came up, the more you knock aside, the more it opens up. And all of a sudden, 1 minute we're talking about, but how can you say humans are valuable based on that when we talk about these evolutionary theories and so said this and this and this, and as soon as we get past that, the next question or the next thing out of their mouth is, I'm so angry with God. I was so hurt when this happened to me. And sometimes it happens so lightning fast that I'm praying on my feet and just I'm almost taken aback. And then we're talking about real things. Don't you remember who you are? Don't you remember that you are an intrinsically valuable human being made in the image of God? That is who you are, not this problem, not this struggle, not these things that people are saying about you. That is what is most true of you. And I think the best thing we have on our side, because I can tell you that the storytellers do drive the culture. We all know that. We see it happen on a day-to-day basis. Guys, every single one of us in this room and every single one of you sitting at home has a better story to tell other people about themselves. You get to remind them who they are.
Yep. If I could sum up this, it would be this way. Our church leaders need to know they can win on abortion. Yeah. They're fearful